I'm delighted to present our speaker today, Waldemar Perez. He's a club member and tireless researcher and painstaking in all his research. I'm so impressed with what he's done. I hope you really enjoy his presentation. I'll let him explain his credentials. Anybody that wants to know more about the 9/11 Studies Club can go to pcc911studies.com. Our schedule is posted there. The site is under development. We'll be putting more and more things on there, but it will have our schedule for the term. We've got one more session this term, March 14th, and we have not determined our schedule for next term, for spring term or summer term. So if you want to know more, it's a fascinating topic. It beats Agatha Christie by a mile, and it's extremely important. So without further ado, Waldemar Perez.
Thank you.
Thank you, Waldemar.
All right, well, thank you for coming. I'm Waldemar, and I'm going to be presenting the second part of the presentation. The first part was dedicated, or we investigated the militarization of police as a aftermath of 9/11. In this presentation, we're going to go back and touch on a few topics that we started touching during the first presentation, and we're going to make a connection from 9/11 to the militarization of police to now geopolitics. And I believe that's the area that I'm particularly interested in, because this is a big puzzle. It takes time to connect all the dots, and everything that I have researched has come to pass in one way or another, and we seem to be heading in the wrong direction when it comes to geopolitics. So a little bit about me. I'm a mechanical engineer. I used to work for the Department of Defense. I work for the Navy as a research and development engineer for 4 years. Then I moved to work for a defense contractor in New Jersey for 6 years. So my background is ex-military industrial complex. And how I came to be interested in all these things, well, I think it was a pure accident, to be honest with you. I was back in 2008, 2007, I was always been interested in finance and the economy and all of that, and don't take any financial advice from me, by the way, because I'm not good at it. But I was researching, I was listening to this guy that I happen to like a lot. He has a program on Russian television. His name is Max Kaiser. So I went back, I was watching an interview on an alternative news website, and he was being interviewed there, and after I finished the interview, I happened to come across an advertisement for the 9/11 engineers explosive evidence video. So I got curious, because I never, the way the advertisement was, it was very professionally put together, and I was curious about what was all about, because I heard all these crazy theories, but here you have a group of people that apparently was very credible. So I went and watched the video, and that changed my life forever. I mean, after that, I understood a little bit of what they were talking about, and I'm like, definitely, there is something to this. It's not just a theory. So that's how I came across the information. I be honest with you, it hasn't been easy for me to absorb and make the connections of everything that is happening. It's like an alternative reality. And I struggle with this every day, but I can only say that knowing is very important. It's very important for everybody. I'm a political atheist. I don't belong to any particular party, not a Republican. I used to be a Democrat. That's where my background is, but I don't. I decided that until some real change comes along, I don't vote. That's what I decided. But like Marvin was saying, this is a political problem, so we need to attack it in such a way that we create awareness from the public, because once the people understand what's really going on, maybe we have a hope for maybe a third party or something that really comes along to change everything. So we hope that that will be the case. We're going to be touching on why do we need a 9/11 investigation. We're going to put down some examples. How the 9/11 events were used to justify the recent geopolitical developments all the way to the latest on Ukraine and Syria. We're going to define what a false flag operation is, and we're going to look at all the history of false flag events that are non-contested by historians. We're going to look at the current Middle East and Asia developments and recent deployment of not only troops but military hardware that is really worrying. So why do we need another 9/11 investigation? Well, it is one of the documents that early on in my research caught my attention. This is a document that was classified, I believe, by accident in 2000. And most of the American public doesn't know it exists. It's called Operation Northwoods. And essentially, it's a 15-page document that got approval all the way by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all the way to the Secretary of Defense. And in there, you will see a plan to commit act of terrorism against the American people to then go back and blame it on Fidel Castro. Apparently, the president back then, John F. Kennedy, was horrified about this, and he wanted to dismantle the CIA and make some real changes, and he was really pissed at the Joint Chiefs of Staff for planning this. But again, this is something that has been happening for a while. So in pages 8, 9, and 10, I'm going to read some of the things that they were planning. Here in the top, it says, we could blow up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blame Cuba. We could develop a communist Cuban terror campaign in Miami, Florida cities, and even Washington. Casualty lists in U.S. newspaper will cause a helpful wave of indignation. The terror campaign could be pointed at Cuban refugees seeking heaven in the U.S. We could sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated. It is possible to create an incident which will demonstrate convincingly that a Cuban aircraft has attacked and shut down as a chartered civil airline in a route from the United States to Jamaica, Guatemala, or Venezuela. The passengers could be a group of college students on a holiday or any grouping of persons with a common interest to support chartering a non-flight. And this is only, one of the many things that they were planning back then. And the first thing that people, when I show this to people, the first thing they tell me, well, that was back in the 60s, and, now, we have all these checks and balances and all of that, So the very fact that they came up with a plan is an act of treason by definition. And it wasn't investigated, nobody lost their heads, no heads roll over this incident. And the troubling thing is that it is not the only document. If you go to the CIA's own website, the public website, you type Operation Gladio, you will see a whole lot of information on what this general, Leminster, planned in Europe. He was the architects of Operation Gladio A and B, where they conducted acts of terrorism in Europe to, as part of a NATO effort to keep Europe together and fight communism back then. So it was the same general that was transferred from his post to be main general of NATO to run that operation. And it's still going on today. The second thing that is interesting when I confront people about 9/11 and talk to them about Operation Northwoods and all of this is, well, there are not whistleblowers out there. If something this big, was really happened, I'm sure there will be a lot of people who will come forward and say something. And I'm going to quote Noam Chomsky, who said it is a very leaky system, and I don't know of any whistleblowers. Maybe he hasn't been paying attention, but there are lots and hundreds of whistleblowers out there. We're going to go through some of their quotes right now. Even the 9/11 commissioners, don't believe the investigations that they conducted. So, some people also, mainly I'm close to people on the left, so they come and tell me, well, that's a right-wing conspiracy theory. But you have to point out also how come that so many conservatives are critical of the Bush government, and why so many high-profile Democrats also believe 9/11 was a false flag operation. And this, we're going to touch here on a partial list of, it's way bigger than this, but we don't have time to cover everything, and this is still a lot of information. But we're going to go through some of the quotes here from the 9/11 commissioners, and this doesn't include scientists, engineers, legal scholars, families of the victims, or others, so the list is really big. But here is the co-chair of the 9/11 Commission, Thomas Keane, and Lee Hamilton said that the CIA and likely the White House obstructed our investigation. Co-chair Lee Hamilton also said, I don't believe for a minute we got everything right, that the commission was set up to fail from the beginning, that people should keep asking questions about 9/11. 9/11 Commissioner Timothy Roemer said, we were extremely frustrated with the false statements we were getting. Commissioner Max Cleland resigned from the commission, stating, it is a national scandal. This investigation is now compromised, and one of these days we'll have to get the full story because the 9/11 issue is so important to America. But this White House wants to cover it up. That was during the Bush administration. Commissioner John Lehman, we purposely put together a staff that had, in a way, conflicts of interest. And this is something that the families of the 9/11 victims pointed out early on. They wanted to get there Henry Kissinger, and they wanted to get this other person, I can't remember his name, that was a clear conflict of interest. The senior counsel of the 9/11 Commission, John Farmer, who led the 9/11 staff inquiry, said, I was shocked at how different the truth was from the way it was described. This is not spin, this is not true. Congressman. According to the co-chair of the Congressional Inquiry into 9/11, the former head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Bob Graham, a U.S. government informant, was the landlord to two of the hijackers for over a year, but the White House refused to let the 9/11 inquiry interview him. Current Senator Bob Patrick Leahy states, the two questions that the Congress will not ask is why did 9/11 happen on George Bush's watch? Why did he, when he had a clear warning that it was going to happen, why did they allow it to happen? Current Republican Congressman Ron Paul calls for a new 9/11 investigation and states that we see the 9/11 investigation that have been done so far as more or less a cover-up and no real explanation for what went on. Democratic Congressman Denny Kushini hints at that we're not being told the truth about 9/11. U.S. Democratic Congressman Dan Hamburg says that the U.S. government assisted in the 9/11 attacks, stating that, I think there was a lot of help from the inside. Former Republican Congressman and senior member of the House Armed Services Committee, who served 6 years as the chairman of the Military Research and Development Subcommittee, Kurt Weldon, has shown that the U.S. tracked hijackers before 9/11. He's open to hearing information about the explosives in the Twin Towers, and he's open to the possibility that 9/11 was an inside job. Military leaders. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under President Ronald Reagan, Colonel Ronald D. Ray, said that the official story of 9/11 is the dog that doesn't hunt. Colonel Robert Bowman, I believe that this guy passed away recently, director of the U.S. Star Wars Space Defense Program in both the Republican and Democratic administration, who was a senior Air Force colonel who flew 101 combat missions, stated that 9/11 was an inside job. He also said, if our government had merely done nothing, and I said that as an old interceptor pilot, I know the drill. I know what it takes, I know how long it takes, I know what the procedures are. I know what they were, and I know that they have changed than to if our government had merely done nothing and allowed normal procedures to happen on that morning of 9/11. The Twin Towers will still be standing and thousands of dead Americans will still be alive. That is treason. U.S. Army Air Defense Officer and NORAD attack director decorated with the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, and the Soldier Medal Captain Daniel Davis stated, "There is no way that an aircraft would not be intercepted when they deviate from their flight plan, turn off their transponders, or stop communication with air traffic control. Attempt to obscure facts by calling them a conspiracy theory doesn't change the truth. It seems something is rotten in the States." And we're going to see later on how, there were plenty of airplane intercepted before 9/11. It's common practice when an airplane deviates from its course, they send somebody to investigate. And we're going to see the details in a short video in a few moments. And more military leaders here. U.S. General, Commanding General of U.S. European Command and Supreme Allied Commander Europe, decorated with a Bronze Star, Silver Star, and Purple Heart, General Wesley Clark. We're going to see him in a video shortly. "We have never finished the investigation of 9/11 and whether the administration actually misused the intelligence information it had. The evidence seems pretty clear to me. I've seen that for a long time." Lieutenant Colonel Steve Butler, 24-year Air Force career, Vice Chancellor for Students Affairs at the Defense Language Institute, said, "Of course Bush knew about the impending attacks on America. He did nothing to warn the American people because he needed this war on terrorism." Two-star General Major General Albert Stubling questions the attack on the Pentagon. U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, former instructor of the U.S. Air Force Fighter Weapons School and NATO's Tactical Leadership Program with a 20-year Air Force career, Lieutenant Colonel Guy S. Racer said the following: "I'm 100% convinced that the attacks of September 11, 2001 were planned, organized, and committed by treasonous perpetrators that have infiltrated the highest levels of our government. Those of us in the military took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Just because we have retired doesn't make that oath invalid. So it is not just our responsibility, it's our duty to expose the real perpetrators of 9/11 and bring them to justice, no matter how hard it is, how long it takes, or how much we have to suffer to do it. We owe it to those who have gone before us, who executed that same oath, and who are doing the same thing in Iraq and Afghanistan right now. Those of us who joined the military and faithfully executed orders that were given us had to trust our leaders. The violation and abuse of that trust is not only heinous, but ultimately the most accurate definition of treason." They're almost there with the military leaders. U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Shelton F. Langford, a fighter pilot with over 300 combat missions flown and a 21-year Marine Corps career, believes that 9/11 was an inside job and said, This is not about party, it isn't about Bush bashing. It's about our country, our Constitution, and our future. Your countrymen have been murdered, and the more you delve into it, the more it looks as though they were murdered by our government, who use it as an excuse to murder other people thousands of miles away. If you ridicule others who have sincere doubts and who know factual information and directly contradicts the official report and who wants explanation from those who hold the keys to our government and have motive, means, and opportunity to pull off a 9/11, but you are too lazy or fearful or to check into the facts yourself, what does that make you? Are you afraid that you will learn the truth and you can handle it? Here we have a list of foreign military leaders from the Russian armed forces, Germans, Canadians. There is a lot of people from around the world that really understand what's going on. Intelligence professionals. These are people that work within the CIA, NSA, and all the intelligence agencies and the secret spy agencies. Former military analyst and famed whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg, better known for his disclosure of the Pentagon Papers. He's a whistleblower. He said this is far more explosive than the Pentagon Papers. He also said that the government is ordering the media to cover up her allegations about 9/11. And he said that some of the claims concerning government involvement in 9/11 are credible. That very serious questions have been raised about what the U.S. government officials knew beforehand and how such involvement there might have been. That engineering 9/11 would not be humanly or psychologically beyond the scope of the current administration, and that there is enough evidence to justify a new hard-hitting investigation into 9/11 with subpoenas and testimony taken under oath. So we can keep going. It's a huge list of highly credible people from different agencies, different government organizations, the military, the 9/11 commissioners. You know, so when people tell me, "Oh, we don't have whistleblowers," I just laugh, because it's more than obvious that there have been plenty of people talking about this, and some of them have lost their lives. So it's not an argument. So we can go on with this. This guy was reading this morning an article by this guy, which is really good. He's really worried about current geopolitics. This is a decorated 20-year CIA veteran who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter, called perhaps the best on-the-ground field officer in the Middle East, and whose astounding career formed the script for the Academy Award-winning motion picture Syriana, said that the evidence points at 9/11 having had aspects of being an inside job. So there are lots of highly credible people that really understand what's going on, and they don't receive the necessary media attention. I always remember growing up and people telling me about all these evil dictators everywhere, where, you know, they hate libraries, they don't like people to be aware or informed about what's going on, so they take the books, you know, and make sure that you don't read history, and you don't, you know, do all these things to really wake up, you know. And that's one of the most traumatic experiences for me researching all of this, is that I came to the conclusion that we are no different. I started reading books like the ones we have here on the table, and like Untold History of the United States by Oliver Stone. And, you know, he himself is a historian, and he wrote the book because one day he woke up and he's like, "Oh my God, you know, this is not what I was told." So he came up with this book, which is, I think it was a $5 million project, and he made a Showtime documentary that is a 10-hour documentary on the history of the United States that we don't know about. And, you know, that's how you control people. It's basically an information war. And if you control certain facts and you discredit people who ask questions, you know, you win. You know, and people, if you think about it, people don't really have the time. People live fast lives. They don't have the time to sit down, read a book, watch a documentary, and, you know, do the research that we do here. And it's a big puzzle. There's a lot of information to absorb, and there are other distractions like Kim Kardashian and all the people out there that you know, entertain us. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is an overwhelming amount of technical data on 9/11. I've gone through just, you know, for this presentation, I just put some short bullets because there is so much to look into that. I thought that at least for the purpose of this presentation, that I wasn't going to focus necessarily on the technical aspects of 9/11 that much, because that have been addressed by other people and other presentations. So I'm more concerned with the geopolitics around it, but still I want, you know, to touch just briefly on the technical aspect, because for people that come for the first time, it is important to just know the basics. And some of the basics we have here is that there is overwhelming evidence of highly advanced military-grade nanothermite. And the first time I look at the at the scientific papers and the dust samples and the people that conducted the research, I said, as an engineer that I am, I said, that's the smoking gun, because the material, the way the material was manufactured, there are only a few labs in the United States who have the capabilities of pulling this off. And we knew about thermite. We didn't know about nanothermite. And to manufacture this, you need to specialize labs where you can lay down in really thin layers this material using, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Waldemar, you as an engineer, have you ever seen nanothermite?
I mean, I've read the information, but I haven't physically been close to it or conducted any,
Do you know anybody who's handled it commercially?
Commercially, no. I don't know.
We've never seen it, and we just know it doesn't exist in some kind of a special operating force.
Yeah, apparently this is something that is available to the military, but not to the public. Thermite is something that you can manufacture in your garage if you want to. It's nothing difficult. But nanothermite is apparently a controlled substance, if you will. But there are labs. Apparently, there are labs that supply that service to the military. But I'm not aware of if you can get a sample of it and test it yourself or anything.
Well, is there any demolitions in the demolition sector? People who do this for a living, have they seen this thermite?
I'm not aware of that. I think.
I imagine they've seen some kind of explosive, but they've seen thermite.
Yeah, I would say if what they did on 9/11, the way the buildings came down, if the material can achieve the later investigations that they did on it, what it's capable of, I would assume is something that they're gonna restrict access to it. It's far more powerful than thermite, which is a traditional military explosives that not only used for building demolition, but for destroying military hardware. Another something else that caught my attention was the fact that some buildings came down at freefall speed, others are 2/3 of freefall speed, which to me as an engineer didn't make any sense, because if you ever play with Legos or cinder blocks, you know that if you throw the first one down, maybe a few of them will crack, but there is going to be a delay, and that delay, accumulates through the building. So the government came, and some people came up with what they call the pancake theory, where buildings came down and crushed the other buildings. But even if I was to entertain that idea, it doesn't make any sense, because you will still see a delay, a significant delay. And Building 7, for example, wasn't hit by an airplane, and it came down like a perfect controlled demolition scene, if you will. A lot of people had pre-knowledge of building collapse. We know of firefighters that were warning bystanders to move back because Building 7 was going to come down. How did they know that? Also, I remember I was working for a military contractor back then, and we were watching thermal imaging devices. They were taking pictures at the time of the remains of the World Trade Center, and they couldn't figure out why the extremely high temperatures there for months. They kept pouring water into the place and flooding, all the substations and everything that was down below the pile of debris, and for 90 days they couldn't extinguish the fire. There is nothing that we know of in normal buildings that will cause temperatures of 27 degrees Fahrenheit for that long. So that points out to nanothermite, and that explains why nanothermite can keep the reaction going underwater. It would explain a whole lot of all these technical details. The pulverization of concrete. When you see a building collapse, you big chunks of concrete, and it was just a dust. The building just turned into dust essentially. So even though we don't know all the details of everything about 9/11, at a minimum, smell fishy, you know, if you're a skeptic. And I want to point out also there is no precedent of building collapses at near free fall speed due to office fires or airplane crashes. And if you do a quick you know, internet search, you will see a lot of different airplanes and hitting buildings incidents, and none of them have suffered major damage where the building have actually collapsed. You know, it just doesn't happen. And we're not going to watch this, but I just want to point out, I have it here because it's an hour and 30 minutes documentary, and it's something that I watched recently, and to me it's one of the best documentaries out there on 9/11 for beginners. He's a guy that around the same time that I woke up, I don't know what his professional background is, but he's self-employed somehow. And he came across all this information, and he became really troubled by what he learned. So he decided to create this project, but he almost destroyed his life on the process of research in 9/11. And it's excellent. It's an excellent documentary, Anatomy of a Great Deception. I think he partnered with engineers and architects on this project. Here is the scientific paper I was telling you guys about. We cannot read it well, but I provide the link if you're interested in reading the material. It's out there in different websites. You can search for this paper, and I have it in electronic form. I can email it to you. And it's a study of the nanothermite chips that they found on the residue of the World Trade Center. And a few people came up with a laboratory setup and went on to test this material, and they came to the conclusion that it's a highly sophisticated material that is thermitic in nature. It emits heat as the reaction goes on, and they explain really well how the material was built in layers, and that these capabilities are only available to a few people in the United States. Again, this is a sample, dust samples from the World Trade Center.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What are those things that look like salmon or whatever? Yeah, what are those?
The red chips?
Yeah.
But the red chips is what remains of these are samples, first of all, from the World Trade Center dust. And in it, they found these red chips. And the red chips are thermitic in nature, meaning that it's a material that when you apply certain conditions to it, it releases energy. It creates a thermitic reaction, like in the case of thermite, which is an explosive. Thermite has been used forever has many different applications, from building railroads, tracks.
Is this thermite that is burned out after 9 days? Is that what this is?
No, this is unreacted. It's thermite that didn't react. It's just in its original states.
Explosive residue.
Explosive residue, yeah. But it didn't.
How big is that? I mean, how
1 millimeter is just give you an idea of the different sample sizes. This is 100 microns.
tiny?
Extremely tiny. Extremely tiny. Yeah. Okay. Right. So apparently, yeah, the difference between thermite, now that you mentioned that, and nanothermite is that science has figured a way to make things more efficient by pulverizing things so finely that you increase the surface area, and therefore you create something more powerful. Let's use gasoline as an example. If you have liquid gasoline, is one thing, but if you spray gasoline, you can create a far more explosive action with it. And it all comes down to surface area. That's why nanotechnologies, that's what it is all about, increasing surface area. So here are some surveys by the 9/11 engineer organization. according to some polls, 38% of Americans have doubts about the official account of 9/11, and 10% do not believe it at all. That is compared to only a minority of those polled, 40%, who are completely satisfied. So with this, we're going to watch a short video from Storm Clouds Gathering. This guy is an activist, and he left the United States about 5 years ago, and I respect him a lot. He's really, really good. He's a real smart person. He knows a lot about a whole lot of stuff, and geopolitics is one of them. And he put together these videos on YouTube, and let's watch this one.
Some events echo through the pages of history, causing ripples decades or even centuries later. These secondary consequences are sometimes a direct result of the events themselves, but more often than not, they are driven by our perception, the mythology that we build around those events. The narrative of 9/11 defined the past decade. It was used to justify the Patriot Act, the indefinite detention provisions in the NDAA of 2012 and 2013, and it was used to take America into war against Afghanistan, then Iraq. 4,000 Americans may have died on that day, but well over 1 million civilians died based on the story of what happened. Of course, the fact that so much death and destruction was justified using that narrative makes it emotionally difficult for many Americans to re-examine it. After all, admitting you were wrong when nothing is at stake is hard enough. But if the official story of 9/11 is wrong, then this would mean that the US government killed all those civilians and shredded your Constitution based on a lie. And some of you were cheering them on. When people need to believe something, the facts matter very little. Reality can be twisted and bent into any shape needed, information discarded, and contradictions ignored. Never underestimate people's willingness to delude themselves. In America, where the need to believe is most entrenched, you'll rarely see September 11th addressed without some people resorting to third-grader level name-calling. Tinfoil hat, conspiracy theorists, conspiratards, 9/11 nutters. I'm sure you've heard these. It's the lowest and least sophisticated flavor of logical fallacy, the ad hominem. But it works when you're dealing with people who operate on a third-grade level. What's most hilarious about this attempt to stigmatize those who dare question the official story is the fact that many of the members of the actual 9/11 Commission have spoken out to say that the investigation was a sham.
I want to start by asking you, as co-chairman of the 9/11 Commission, what your basic reaction is to this study by the Center for Public Integrity that shows there were 935 statements, false statements, by these top 8 administration officials.
Well, I commend what the center has done. It's taken exhaustive research to go through all of the statements made by these top public officials and to pick out the instances where they just flat out told us what was not the truth in order to move us towards war in Iraq. And I think you've performed a very valuable public service. And I hope the lesson that arises that comes from all of your work is that all of us have to be more skeptical of statements made by our public leaders and scrutinize those statements with very great care.
Look, why didn't they talk about Building 7 in the report?
That's good.
Why do you think that was
I don't really
left
have
out?
I don't have an easy answer for you. And I would ask it when time.
Can you see this medical thing right now?
Yeah. Anyway.
Do you support a criminal investigation into 9/11? Because I know yours was an exposition. It was not a criminal investigation.
I don't think so, but I don't know. I mean, I do support a permanent commission to examine not just that, but lots of other things in this area. So.
But if it's a permanent cover-up, then it's. I mean, if it's an act of war and it's hiding things, which everyone on your commission knew that the Pentagon was changing their stories, lying to you, and it's a cover-up of an act of war, and under Article 3, Section 3 of the Constitution, it's treason. So unless we get to the very bottom of it, then we're still talking a treasonous exposition.
This is a longer conversation. I'm not sure this one you ever get to the bottom of it.
We have to, or we can't save our country, sir.
I don't think. Well, if that's the condition upon which we're going to be saving our country, because the problem it's a 30-year-old conspiracy.
No, I'm talking about 9/11.
That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, you are. You mean at this?
Yeah. Anyway.
Guys, it doesn't matter if the people who actually ran the investigation say it was a scam. You're supposed to believe the official story. If you don't, you're crazy, unhinged, and maybe even a little bit dangerous. Listen, I know you don't want anyone to think you're crazy, but let's just take a look at a little bit of the evidence, just between me and you. I won't tell anyone, I promise. Now, this isn't a 2-hour documentary, so we don't have time to cover everything. Instead, we'll just confront a few obvious smoking guns. Smoking gun number 1, the collapse of the World Trade Center Building 7. 3 buildings collapsed in New York on that day. 2 were hit by planes. Building 7 was not hit by a plane. No one claims that it was. Yet at 5:20 p.m. on September 11th, it collapsed into its own footprint. It went straight down at free fall speed. At first, NIST tried to deny this and placed its computer models over the actual video evidence. But in their final report, they do in fact admit that the building fell at free fall. Why is this significant?
It's just like taking your car keys out and just dropping them. That's how fast the building came down, for over 100 feet.
This is high school physics.
A building cannot do free fall with 40,000 tons of structural steel in its structural system without it being blown up.
The only way that a building can accelerate as it collapses is by having pre-engineered, precisely timed, and precisely placed explosives. In other words, controlled demolition.
The funny thing is, in spite of the fact that never in history had a steel frame building collapsed due to an office fire, a lot of people knew the building was going to collapse before it came down. We have CNN reporting the collapse an hour before it came down.
We are getting information now that one of the other buildings, Building 7 in the World Trade Center complex, is on fire and has either collapsed or is collapsing.
We also have the BBC who reported the collapse even though the building was still visible in the background.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost a sense downtown in New York behind me, down by the World Trade Centers, of just an area completely closed off as the rescue workers try to do their job. But this isn't the first building that has suffered as a result. We know that part of the Marriott Hotel next to the World Trade Center also collapsed as a result of this huge amount of falling debris from 110 floors of the two twin towers of the World Trade Center. As you can see behind me,
we have footage of people on the street warning that the building was about to collapse.
You hear that? Keep your eye on that building. It's coming down. The building is about to blow up. Moving back.
How did they know that this was going to happen when it isn't even physically possible for an ordinary office fire to bend or melt steel? It makes about as much sense as a farmer suddenly warning you that his pig is about to levitate. And this brings us to smoking gun number 2. Explosions in the basements of the Twin Towers and on the lower floors of Building 7.
I worked in the building for 20 years. I was the person in charge of all the stairwells of the North Tower. And on 9/11, I had the only master key that opened the doors that rescue people. This is the master key. They call it the key of hope. And basically, I was a janitor. Like I said, on that day, there was an explosion on the basement. And this is prior to the building got hit by the plane. And then the plane hit, and then there was a series of explosions afterwards. And a person comes running into the office saying, explosion, explosion, explosion. His skin was pulled all from his armpits all the way to the top of the fingertips, and pieces missing off his face, and then it was total chaos.
You're Kenny Johanneman. Spell your name. Johannemann. And you were working there? Yes, I was right there. I was down in the basement, came down, all of a sudden the elevator blew up, smoke. I dragged the guy out, his skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out to the ambulance.
Mr. Hess came running back in. He said, we're the only ones up here, we got to get out of here. He found the stairwell. So we subsequently went to the stairwell and we're going down the stairs. When we reached the 6th floor, the landing that we were standing on gave way. There was an explosion and the landing gave way. And I was left there hanging. I had to climb back up and now I had to walk back up to the 8th floor. I was trapped in there for several hours. I was trapped in there when both buildings came down. All this time, I'm hearing all types of explosions. All this time, I'm hearing explosions. When they finally got to us, and they took us down to what they called the lobby, because I asked them, I said, when we got down there, I said, where are we? He said, this was the lobby. And I said, you got to be kidding me. It was total ruins. Total ruins. Now, keep in mind, when I came in there, the lobby had nice escalators. It was a huge lobby. And for me to see what I saw
was unbelievable. I'm just confused about one thing, and one thing only. Why World Trade Center 7 went down in the first place. I'm very confused about that. I know what I heard. I heard explosions. The explanation I got was it was the fuel oil tank. I'm an old boiler guy. If it was a fuel oil tank, it would have been one side of the building.
This of course brings us to smoking gun number 3, molten steel found in the basements of the buildings after the collapse.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails, like you're in a foundry.
In an office fire, you cannot generate enough heat to melt steel.
So if you have a flame at 750 degrees, you can hold that flame under a steel beam forever, and you'll never reach a high enough temperature to bend steel, let alone melt it.
It wasn't just Building 7 that went down like a controlled demolition. All 3 buildings that collapsed in New York that day came down at free fall speed. The thousands of tons of steel and concrete beams that should have resisted such a collapse were blown apart as the building was falling. Over 1,700 licensed architects and engineers have gone on record to say that the official 9/11 story is physically impossible. It would have required carefully placed explosives to take out the support beams. And guess what? The dust from the ruins of the towers has been independently tested and shown to contain large quantities of military-grade nanothermite. The results of these tests were peer-reviewed and published in the Open Chemical Physics Journal in 2009. However, the agency behind the official investigation, NIST, has refused from the very beginning to test for any accelerants or explosives in the dust. This in spite of the fact that such testing is explicitly called for in fire investigation standards for events involving this kind of damage.
My name is Mark Basile. I'm a chemical engineer. I have a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. I've worked for about 25 years in industry, and the majority of what I do is analytical work and figuring out what materials are composed of, why they are what they are, why they do what they do. It's basically a lot of material science is what I do. In December of 2007, I attended a conference in Boston on 9/11 where Stephen Jones was going to be speaking about his work on the iron-based microspheres. I attended the conference and listened to him talk, where he also, for the first time, discussed his discovery of the red-gray chips that we'll get into a little bit later here. After he spoke, I approached him and I was interested in being put in contact with a source for World Trade Center dust to independently look at the material and either confirm or deconfirm what he had found. About a month later, I received my first sample of World Trade Center dust from Jeanette McKinley, which was one of the individuals that is spoken of in his report on the thermetic materials that he put out in March of 2009, I think it was. So anyway, I received a sample of dust in January of 2008 and basically started working with the material. I found iron-based microspheres in there, just as he had done, and I also found the red-gray chips that he had spoken of. I created an apparatus where I could basically control energy input to the chips, heating them resistively on a stainless steel heater strip to an ignition temperature, not overheating them, but just bringing them up to the ignition temperature, and then analyzing the resultant products. And what I can confirm also is that these chips, the red layer is thermitic, it does produce molten iron, and I've seen it in a number of chips that Jeanette McKinley supplied to me, and I've also seen it in an independent sample that was also supplied to me from a museum in New York, which is asked to remain anonymous at this point. One of the things I'd like to stress about these chips is that they really shouldn't be there. They're not a natural formed agglomeration of aluminum from the aircraft or materials that were in the building and iron oxide that got knocked off. It isn't just a haphazard bringing together of iron oxide and aluminum, which is the basic components of thermite. This is a material that is made up of nano-sized particles that are all very uniform, very symmetrical. It's in a silica-based matrix that holds the whole thing together, and when they're ignited, these iron droplets that are formed basically eat through the silica matrix and form both droplets, and there actually creates these large relative voids within the residue of the chip that are all coated with iron films inside.
We're not even scratching the surface here. No matter what part of the official story you look at, there are glaring holes that require magical thinking to explain away. You were lied to, pure and simple. And a lot of people were killed based on that lie. I know that's uncomfortable to look at, but it's the truth. So why are we looking at this now, 12 years after the fact? First of all, because the war on terror is still underway. There are people being killed right now because of this lie, and the federal government is grabbing more and more dictatorial power to supposedly protect you. Furthermore, those who control the US government are trying to find a way to take America to war with Syria, a war which will draw in Iran, Russia, and China, World War III. But the American people aren't going for it. They aren't buying the propaganda. So to convince the people to back this war, they're going to have to do something big, something that makes 9/11 pale in comparison. This is just how they operate. Problem, reaction, solution is pretty much the only tool they have at their disposal. Originality is not their forte. The stigma surrounding 9/11 research and the juvenile way that the uninformed attempt to cower those who speak out into silence is more than just an obstacle to truth. As long as the powers that be think that they can get away with this kind of thing, and as long as you keep accepting their ridiculous stories at face value, they'll keep doing it. Waking up isn't a matter of personal preference. It's a question of life and death.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war.
For more videos like this, subscribe to Storm Clouds Gather.
Just want to cut it short. It's just the end of it, in the interest of time. So what is a false flag operation? From Wikipedia, a false flag describes a covert military or paramilitary operation designed to deceive in such a way that the operations appear as though they were being carried out by other entities, groups, or nations than those who actually planned and executed them. The term comes from naval warfare, where people will fly a flag that is not their own, that wasn't their own, and then it will change the flag later. And this is a tactic that is outlaw, if there is such a thing in military doctrine. Is prohibited because it's not. I'm trying to use the proper language here, but maybe I should read it. Such operations are also acceptable in certain circumstances in land warfare, for example, to deceive enemies in similar ways, providing that the deception is not perfidious and that all such deceptions are discarded before opening fire upon the enemy. So, in other words, you're allowed to, in battle, to deceive the enemy as long as you tell them who you are right before you start shooting, and that's why they are prohibited. And also, we also want to point out that a lot of our leaders use the national security excuse to don't show the evidence of what they're doing, or show the evidence of what they say that the other people are doing. And the way they compartmentalize all of these incidents or all these strategies is to tell people, well, it's classified, we cannot show you the evidence, or it's a matter of national security, we cannot tell you everything. But that's essentially, they're lying to you, essentially.
How is it that on 4 separate occasions on one day, that a $1 trillion military and intelligence infrastructure could fail.
I don't think anybody could have predicted that these people would take an airplane and slam it into the World Trade Center, take another one and slam it into the Pentagon.
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
But that turns out not to be true. U.S. military planners did envision and practice those very scenarios. As reported by USA Today, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, conducted exercises with fighter jets, simulating hijacked planes flown into the World Trade Center in the 2 years before the attacks. Pentagon planners also envisioned the attack on the Pentagon 5 months before it happened. According to this April 2001 Pentagon email, Air Force officials wanted a war game, having a terrorist group hijack a commercial airline and fly it into the Pentagon. The idea was to check response times to launch fighter jets. But according to the Pentagon email, the plan was ultimately rejected by senior Pentagon officials as too unrealistic. Still to come are questions, big questions, about NORAD's response on the day of the attack. Why, despite all the exercises and the planning, Peter, jet fighters were not in place anywhere near New York or Washington.
Quite an amazing story. Many thanks, Brian. Brian Ross.
One drill, called Amalgam Virgo, was conducted on June 1st and 2nd, 2001, and simulated successful terrorist attacks. Its purpose was to focus on unconventional threats, including an airborne hijacking. One plan would simulate the hijacking of a commercial airliner, which would be crashed into the Capitol. The second part of the exercise, which was planned but not executed before 9/11, involved 2 planes with actual pilots on the flight deck. FBI agents would hijack the planes and divert them to secure locations. And on its cover, Osama bin Laden. In fact, multiple war games were underway on 9/11 itself.
The question was, we had 4 war games going on September 11th, and the question that I tried to pose before the secretary had to go to lunch was whether or not the activities of the 4 war games going on September 11th actually impaired our ability to respond to the attacks.
The answer to the question is no, did not impair our response. In fact, General Eberhart, who was then the commander of North American Aerospace Defense Command, as he testified in front of the 9/11 Commission, I believe he told them that it enhanced our ability to respond. There were 2 CPXs. There was 1 Department of Justice exercise that didn't have anything to do with the other 3, and there was an actual operation ongoing because there was some Russian bomber activity up near Alaska.
So, did the war games ultimately help or hinder our response?
September 11th was day 2 of Vigilant Guardian, an exercise staged by the Joint Chiefs and NORAD, which simulated hijacked planes in the northeastern United States. Vigilant Guardian is a branch of Global Guardian, a mass Armageddon exercise being conducted at Offutt Air Force Base in cooperation with NORAD. Originally scheduled to take place in late October, Global Guardian was moved to September. The exercise is reportedly canceled after the second Twin Tower is hit. 3 E-4B Doomsday planes remain airborne.
2 government sources familiar with the incident tell CNN it was a military aircraft, and say the details are classified. This comparison of the CNN video and an official Air Force photo suggests the mystery plane is among the military's most sensitive aircraft, an Air Force E-4B. The E-4B is a state-of-the-art flying command post, built and equipped for one reason: to keep the government running no matter what, even in the event of a nuclear war. Ask the Pentagon, and it insists this is not a military aircraft, and there is no mention of it in the official report of the 9/11 Commission. The Pentagon, the Secret Service, and the FAA all say they, at least for public consumption, had no explanation of the giant plane over the president's house, just as the smoke began to rise across the river at the Pentagon.
Barksdale Air Force Base also participated in Global Guardian. Instead of returning directly to Washington, D.C., President Bush would fly to both Barksdale and Offutt Air Force Base before returning to the White House. Another drill, Northern Vigilance, moved fighter jets to Canada and Alaska to monitor a fleet of Russian MiGs on a training mission. Northern Vigilance also placed inputs onto military radar screens. Also referred to as phantoms, inputs are simulated errant aircraft, which appear real to those participating in the exercise.
We fought many phantoms that day.
3 F-16s from Andrews Air Force Base, located 15 miles from the Pentagon, are flown 180 nautical miles away for a training mission in North Carolina. Fort Belvoir, an Army base 10 miles south of the Pentagon, intended to test security in case of a terrorist attack. Employees in the Office of Emergency Management on the 23rd floor of World Trade Center Building 7 continue preparations for Tripod, a biological attack drill scheduled for September 12th. Finally, the National Reconnaissance Office in Virginia begins a drill at 8:45, conducted by a team from the CIA, in which a plane crashes into their building. Also, a number of war games were being conducted that have yet to be fully disclosed.
Ask about the war games that were planned for 9/11.
Commissioner Gorelick.
Could you please be quiet? We have only a few minutes with General Myers. I'd like to ask a question. General Myers, I'm sorry.
I would ask, please, people in the audience to be quiet if you want to stay here.
Sir, this commission has not answered my questions. I'm walking out. It's a farce. I will. Thank you.
So let me get this straight. On the morning of 9/11, the United States is running drills in which hijacked aircraft go in and out of radar. Fighter jets are flown out of the United States, and planes are crashed into buildings. What a coincidence.
And in terms of what motivated me to bring all the aircraft down, as you see one thing happen, that's an accident. When you see two of the same thing occur, it's a pattern. But when you see three of the same thing occur, it's a program. And so at that point, I decided to bring all the aircraft down.
And so, at 9:45, all airborne planes were forced to land. This order applied to all civilian aircraft. Certain military planes were allowed to remain airborne. By 12:16 that afternoon, the FAA managed to ground over 4,000 planes without incident.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?
Why, when Vice President Dick Cheney was aware of an incoming aircraft up to 50 miles away, were employees allowed to remain in the building? Had a single alarm gone off inside the Pentagon, 125 people would be alive today, and hundreds more would not be suffering.
And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?
Norman Minetta's testimony would be completely unreported by the 9/11 Commission. It would also be censored from the online archives of Commission hearings. A spokesperson from the National Archive claimed that it was a technical snafu. The 9/11 Commission will later conclude that Vice President Dick Cheney did not reach the bunker until 9:58.
My main concern is that in your testimony, you
stated that Vice President Dick Cheney came into the POEC office at 9:20 when you arrived, and he was already there. He's gone in front of Meet the Press, and he said that he was there at 9:38.
They did that because they'd received a report that an airplane was headed for the White House.
This is Flight 77, which had left Dulles.
Flight 77. It left Dulles. As best we can tell, they came initially at the White House.
The plane actually circled the White House?
Didn't circle it, but was headed on a track into it.
Tracking it by radar.
And when it entered the danger zone and looked like it was headed for the White House was when they grabbed me and evacuated me to the basement. The plane obviously didn't hit the White House, turned away and we think flew a circle and came back in and then hit the Pentagon.
Yeah, the 9/11 Commission report puts in there at 9:58 that morning.
9:58?
Yeah, I don't know if you got a chance to read it, but it puts in half an hour later. So I don't mean to ask a rhetorical question, but to the best of your recollection, was Vice President Dick Cheney already there at 9:20?
The flight you're referring to is the
flight that came into the Pentagon. This was
before Flight 77.
Before American Airlines went into the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Norm Mineta was in the bunker with Cheney, and so the fact that that wasn't in the 9/11 Commission report was rather odd, don't you think? Yeah. Who was that young man? Did anybody ask who that young man was?
How could Dick Cheney, or anyone in the administration, especially after an aide warned him a plane was 50 miles out and 2 planes had already struck the World Trade Center, allow the Pentagon to be struck?
You know, am I prepared to believe that Dick Cheney would be capable of knowing about this kind of attack on the Pentagon, for example, and allowing it to happen? Well, from what I know about Dick Cheney, yeah.
So here I'm going to show a couple of videos, but first I want to talk about this New York Times Sunday Review article from a couple of years ago, where there was a study conducted in the US, and they found that up to something like 70% of all the terrorist acts in the United States, the FBI has been involved in one way or the other. They provide like in the case of they talk here about the so-called Oregon Christmas tree bomber, Muslim young fellow about 19 years old that supposedly was going to commit an act of terror here in the lighting ceremony of the Christmas tree. But in this case, as in the case in many other cases, the FBI was providing all the materials for building the bomb. They were providing the training and the encouragement to tell this confused guy, would you do it? Would you do it? And when he finally said yes, I would do it, then they said, oh, FBI, we got you. So that's how pretty much how they operate. It justifies part of their budgets, but it's a reality. And this is an article from the New York Times. This is not just an alternative news website. The evidence is overwhelming everywhere. Here we have General Wesley Clark on an interview with Democracy Now! What's the name of this lady? Goodman. Amy Goodman was interviewing General Wesley Clark. And it's interesting to know that he's an insider. So he's telling his story about all these wars that we're seeing right now. They were planned right after 9/11. They had a plan for all of that. Even before 9/11. Go ahead.
About the Christmas tree bomber, what most people don't realize that they overlay the sequestering, the top of the land is sequestering. And basically the FBI got to create an incident to save their job. But if you can look up sequestering and who's going to get cut in the government, the Christmas tree bomber surfaced at that point. So that just shows you that they have to create, a need.
Exactly.
To save their job.
Exactly.
So sequestering, and then you have austerity that come about.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yep. So let's watch this short video. It's only 1 minute of General Wesley Clark, because it's very telling.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, we've made the decision we're going to war with Iraq. This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, we're going to war with Iraq. Why? He said, I don't know. He said, I guess they don't know what else to do. So I said, well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda? He said, no. He says, there's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq. He said, I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments. And he said, I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. The truth is about the Middle East is, had there been no oil there, it would be like Africa. Nobody is threatening to intervene in Africa. The problem is the opposite. We keep asking for people to intervene and stop it.
But this pretty much tells you everything we need to know about what's going on. And so far we have Libya, we have Syria. There is a lot of deployments in Africa now because we found that there is a lot of oil in Africa. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few moments. But it's pretty much what they had planned, and they are still planning to go after Iran. They're looking for the right diplomatic cover to go do it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But here is a really, let's see how long it is, a really interesting short documentary on 100 years of war lies. It's very, 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 very interesting to watch because this the history we haven't been told.
This is an act of aggression that is completely trumped up in terms of its pretext. It's really 19th century behavior in the 21st century. And, you know, the reason for this, David, is because you just don't invade another country on phony pretext in order to assert your interests.
When Secretary of State John Kerry made his now infamous statement about Russia's actions in Ukraine, the hypocrisy was immediately apparent to all but the most clueless of viewers.
Intelligence gathered by this and other governments leaves no doubt that the Iraqi regime continues to possess and conceal some of the most lethal weapons ever devised. The main reason we went into Iraq at the time was we thought he had weapons of mass destruction. It turns out he didn't, but he had the capacity to make weapons of mass destruction. But I also talked about the human suffering in Iraq. Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere.
But perhaps Kerry wasn't so wrong to expect the public to let him get away with such a transparently hypocritical statement. After all, the public have always been happy to go along with every pretext for war presented to them for decade after decade. After Iraq, there was Libya, where we were asked to believe that the invasion of the oil-rich country and rush to set up a central bank by the foreign-backed opposition was nothing more than an attempt to save the country from a power-mad dictator who was arming his troops with Viagra to help them rape innocent civilians.
Nick, you had a chance to speak with the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the issue being Gaddafi, the Libyans, what they're doing. What did he tell you?
Well, one of the things he wants to investigate now, he says, his priority is to investigate allegations of rape that may be systematic and rape that's being assisted, he said, by the distribution of Viagra or Viagra-like products, sexually performance-enhancing products that are getting in the hands of Gaddafi's forces and are being used as part of gang rape. And these are allegations that are surfacing that he says he wants to investigate as a priority.
Until this pretext was overturned by a pesky reporter asking for actual evidence of these crimes.
How many people have been killed, and in which town, in which site, and what kind of the crimes he has ever done in your investigations?
I advise you to read the application of the prosecutor's office, many pages, I think it was 77 pages. We describe in detail the facts, most of it is public. And the judges also decided, analyzing the evidence. So, of course, we are prosecutors and judges, so we rely on facts. So we prove the crimes. That's what we did. We present the case to the judges, and for a month and 10 days, 3 judges from 3 different continents make an independent evaluation, and they decided.
As pointed out by Luis Moreno Ocampo, the document does have 77 pages, but most of its content is not public. Pages 17 to 71 have been redacted, precisely the ones enclosing the summaries of evidence and testimonies.
Before Iraq, there was Afghanistan, where we were asked to believe that the war was necessary in order to get bin Laden, until we were told that was not actually the case.
So I don't know where he is, nor I just don't spend that much time on him, Kelly, to be honest with you.
Similarly with the invasion of Grenada.
When the U.S. military made it clear that it was going to base this invasion on partially on a threat to U.S. medical students on the island, the U.S. media jumped in as if there really was a threat. Of course, there wasn't. That's why none of the medical students were hurt. When the United States made it appear as if Grenada was a base for Cuban operatives, the media started looking for them and imagining them and passing on reports of Cubans in military capacities.
And the Vietnam War.
Renewed hostile actions against United States ships on the high seas in the Gulf of Tonkin have today required me to order the military forces of the United States to take action in reply.
It does appear now that a lot of these torpedo attacks were from the sonar man, you see, and they get keyed up to a thing like this. Everything they hear on the sonar is a torpedo.
You're pretty sure there was a torpedo attack, then?
Oh, no doubt about that, I think. No doubt about that.
No, it was just confusion. And events afterwards showed that our judgment that we'd been attacked that day was wrong.
And World War II.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
On the night of December 6, 1941, intercept stations picked up heavy Japanese radio traffic from Tokyo to their embassy in Washington. The machines clattered with the intercepted purple code groups. The tapes were rushed to the code breakers on Constitution Avenue, where the ciphers were decrypted. The text was then teletyped to the State Department. It ordered the Japanese ambassador to break off diplomatic relations at precisely 1 p.m. Washington time, when the sun was just rising over the Hawaiian Islands.
That vital need was the information available in Washington from the intercepted dispatches, which told when and where Japan would probably strike. I did not get this information.
And World War I.
Now, the Lusitania was a British passenger ship on its way from New York to England, 1915. At that time, England was at war with Germany, but we had not yet joined World War I. Well, the ship went down, and the Americans were told that the Germans simply sank this ship to be ruthless. They saw an innocent passenger ship, wanted to kill a lot of women and children, and so down it went. But that's not why the Germans sank it. They sank it because the Lusitania was loaded from one end to the other with munitions, millions of rounds of ammunition and many other munitions. Everyone who survived that disaster said there were 2 explosions, smaller one and then a huge one. The small one was a torpedo hitting. The large one was the munitions detonating. The ship went down in just 18 minutes after a single torpedo hit. By the way, that's confirmed also by the logbook of the sub that sank. Lusitania, the U-20's logbook said one torpedo followed by massive explosion. Equally significant, before the tragedy, Winston Churchill, who was then head of the British Admiralty, had ordered a study to be done to determine what the political impact would be if a British passenger ship was sunk with Americans on board. And there were almost 200 Americans on board the Lusitania. And prior to the sinking of the Lusitania, an exchange took place between Sir Edward Grey, the British foreign minister, and Edward Mandell House, who was President Woodrow Wilson's top advisor. Here's the exchange of communications. Grey: what will America do if the Germans sink an ocean liner with American passengers on board? House's reply: I believe that a flame of indignation would sweep the United States, and that by itself would be sufficient to carry us into the war.
And the Spanish-American War.
When word of the Maine explosion reached America, some people, including the powerful newspaper owner William Randolph Hearst, immediately blamed Spain. And most of the public believed them. But a nagging question remained. No direct evidence linking Spain to the sinking of the Maine had been found. So why had the ship blown up? In the 1970s, the Navy launched a new investigation into the case. Admiral Hyman Rickover concluded that the explosion aboard the Maine was not caused by a mine at all. Instead, the ship sank because of a terrible accident. Using various techniques, modern researchers have confirmed Rickover's conclusion that the blast was probably indirectly caused by a spontaneous combustion fire inside the Maine's coal bunker.
It would be the height of naivete to believe that the political caste of our own age were any different in their willingness to blatantly fabricate false pretexts to rally the public into war. But perhaps the public is finally catching on. Kony 2012 became a viral video sensation 2 years ago, with press-seeking celebrities endorsing the slick propaganda, seeking to justify the deployment of AFRICOM troops to Uganda in the search for Joseph Kony. But the video was quickly exposed as a sham when independent internet-based researchers discovered that the producers of the video, a group called Invisible Children, had been working with US aid and attended a US State Department-linked summit in London in 2010. The simplistic Kony narrative was further undermined when the internet enabled Ugandans to speak out directly against the video to viewers around the world.
When the Kony 2012 video came out, there was this general feeling that it oversimplified the story of Uganda and also the story of northern Uganda, but also it did not tell the current stories of people in northern Uganda and the current challenges. But also we saw that the story was grossly mistold.
Similarly in Syria, the August 2013 chemical weapons attack in Ghouta was quickly seized upon as a pretext for military intervention in the country.
The indiscriminate slaughter of civilians, the killing of women and children and innocent bystanders by chemical weapons is a moral obscenity. By any standard, it is inexcusable, and despite the excuses and equivocations that some have manufactured, it is undeniable.
A study has now challenged the US claim that Syrian government forces carried out the attack. The study is being conducted by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the MIT. Based on mathematical calculations, the study examined the range of the improvised rocket used in the attack, saying it was too short to have been launched from government-controlled areas. The MIT report concludes that based on the firing range and the troop locations, all possible launching points within a 2-kilometer radius were in insurgent-controlled areas. The report goes on to challenge the U.S. Secretary of State's key assessments of the chemical attack that he presented to the American people last August in an effort to muster support for a military strike on Syria.
And massive worldwide protests, organized on the back of the public's incredulity at yet another Iraq WMD-like lie, managed to get the Obama administration to back off its headlong rush to war. And now, another Kony 2012-like video production is attempting to make a similar case for why Americans and their NATO bloc allies need to be involved in the current Ukrainian crisis.
And now I ask you to build this freedom in our country. You can help us only by telling this story to your friends, only by sharing this video. Please share it. Speak to your friends, speak to your family, speak to your government, and show that you support us.
And just like Kony 2012, this video, too, was exposed for its ties back to the Council on Foreign Relations and the U.S. State Department foreign policy apparatus.
The origins of the video are not quite as grassroots as is portrayed. The clip was produced by the team behind A Whisper to a Roar, a documentary about the fight for democracy all over the world, which was funded by Prince Moulay Hicham of Morocco. The quote, inspiration behind the documentary was none other than Larry Diamond, the Council on Foreign Relations member. The Council on Foreign Relations is considered to be America's most influential foreign policy think tank and has deep connections with the US State Department. Hillary Clinton even half-joked that she wouldn't have to go far to get her orders because the CFR is just down the street from the US State Department.
But it's good to have an outpost of the Council right here down the street from the State Department. We get a lot of advice from the Council, so this will mean I won't have as far to go to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future.
Perhaps the saddest part of all is that once the people whose plight was exploited for the war propaganda have been used, abused, chewed up, and spit out by the war machine, they are completely forgotten about. How many of those same flag-waving propaganda repeaters that pretended to care about the Libyan people, for example, even know what is happening in the country now that the NATO bombs have stopped raining down and the corporate media is telling us to look elsewhere?
We filmed from our hotel balcony as two rival militia clashed. It turned into the worst fighting since the overthrow of Colonel Gaddafi. Libya's weak government has no control. The men with guns are a law unto themselves. The brigades who spearheaded the Libyan revolution now threaten to destroy it.
The simple truth is that the people who fight and die in these bloody wars of aggression are never the ones who benefit from the slaughter. For this reason, the combined resources of the State Department, the corporate media, and countless foundation-funded NGOs are required to sell these lies to an increasingly skeptical public. But now we stand at a crossroads of history, with the public, perhaps for the first time, able to instantly research and expose the propagandistic claims of the ruling establishment almost as soon as they are made. In some ways, the public is better positioned than ever to abandon that 19th century world of war pretexts that Kerry was referring to. Perhaps we can start by consigning politicians like Kerry, and all the other liars who have enabled countless slaughter, warfare, and bloodshed throughout the years, to the dustbin of history by simply refusing to believe their transparent lies. This video is brought to you by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information on this and other topics, please go to BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information and by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com.
Anyways, sorry, it was a very telling video. That guy, his name is James Corbett, and he's a researcher. He's an American based in Osaka, Japan, I believe, and he puts together short documentaries on a whole lot of subjects, and he's really good. Sometimes he partners with somebody from Portland. So, yeah, go ahead.
Waldemar, I've got to admit, I've actually previewed all of your material, all this material for coming here.
Right.
And what drawn me in here today was about halfway through all your pages, your 33 pages, it says you are now a terrorist.
That's right.
And then so, are we pretty much getting in trouble for looking at all this stuff?
That's I don't know. Were you here for the militarization of police speech?
Excuse me?
Were you here for the militarization of police presentation?
Your first presentation?
Yeah.
I didn't make it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I can send you if you leave me your email. I can send you a copy, electronic copy of it. And in that presentation, I talk a lot about the people that the government considers dangerous and terrorist. And we pretty much all fall within that category, and that the same thing will be I would say for the majority of the American population, because I have an electronic copy here. Yeah, it's. Yeah. It's a risk. I debate whether I should be doing this every day, because first of all, I try to be optimistic, but I'm deep inside, I'm not optimistic about the future, because all we are doing here is a public service. We try to inform the public about what's going on. But, I think that there is some hope. It's about 10 to 15% of the population that really understand what's going on. And the reason why, researchers like me and James Corbett and everybody here, the reason we do this is because we try to make it simple enough for people that sits for the first time to watch these kind of things to come up to speed fast. Because, from my own experience, if I were to tell you that spending 2 hours a day for the last 3.5, 4 years researching all this stuff, I think it will easily add up to a part-time job, and for the average American, it will probably take 5 to 6 years to absorb all this information, the books and the documentaries and everything. So I'm trying to make it short and provide all this information for people that are seeing this for the first time. And we're going to get into more into the geopolitics now, but I just wanted to set the foundation for what's going on, so that everybody have a little bit of understanding of where we are coming from, I should say. So yeah, a lot of people, like you said, are familiar with some of these videos. Oh, absolutely not. You destroy your career pretty much.
So most people understand the science of 9/11 because there was no science to prove it. Yet they can't think freely. They can't come out because they will retard their career.
Exactly. Yeah. At some point, when you really understand, I would say personally, from my own experience, coming from military industrial complex background, I would say if I were working for them right now, I would be out of a job. A lot of people really understand at the top level what's going on, so they quickly move. If you're, for example, a university professor to speak all these things, you really put your career in danger if you decide to go down this path. But at the end of the day, when you have a clear understanding of how everything connects, you will come to the conclusion that it's a matter of life or death, whether you take the risk or not. Your sons could be sent to war later, or they could create a big mess and we all die from it. So that's how I see it. I see it as a struggle between, should I be doing this, informing the public, versus if I don't do it, if I don't put a grain of sand, maybe it could be my kids, my family, or everybody who get into a much bigger mess than 9/11. So it's not something that I take lightly. It's something that I think about almost every day. But yes, I am.
And I study, as most, I study from the Pentagon to Twin Towers to World Trade Center 7. I mean, I assume that you can do calculations on these, like architecture.
Yeah.
You understand calculations of structures and things like that.
Correct.
I mean, can you even create a model, of metal, and aluminum flashing together?
I'm sure the technical aspect of it is not the problem, because there is plenty of investigations, plenty of computer models, plenty of physical models have been put together already to do that. The problem is the way I see it is a problem of public opinion. So what you're trying to do is wake up enough people so that we can stop the people that are doing this from keep the wars of aggression, killing millions of people worldwide. Just in Iraq, it was 1 million or 1.5 million for what we know, 500,000 kids according to Madeleine Albright. So, I'm not I researched 9/11, and I'm an engineer, and I'm interested in the technical aspect of it, but I'm not obsessed with the fine details of what's going on. I'm more focused with what happened before, what is happening now, and where we're heading. That's where I spend most of my time.
I looked at where you headed on your research, or your 33 pages of research. And I don't know if this is your last talk for the quarter.
Yeah, I don't know. It depends.
So where are we headed? Do you know the consequences that we're running into? I mean, do you know what's? I noticed that the amount of veteran suicide, for instance, is very closely guarded and kept from us even on the internet. You know, and again, that's one of the consequences. The consequences of the disparity between the rich and poor is growing. And these are all consequences of, you know, paradigm shift that happened, 13 years ago.
I guess
that this is happening. I mean, do you know why we can't find the exact numbers of veteran deaths, suicides on the internet?
I haven't done much research on that area.
If you were a veteran and you went there and you went ahead and killed somebody, you find out it's a bunch of baloney. I mean, you're on the verge of suicide at that point now, aren't you?
Right, yeah.
And that's because of 9/11. 9/11 was, there was no science to get into Afghanistan, except that whatever you saw in the Hollywood stuff of buildings exploding and coming down.
Yeah, I have family members. Right.
We all know, you know, we're all false flag. You know, we all probably participated in it, and we're all whistleblowers, you know, in our sector of some sort. But again, it's the seriousness of, you know, soldiers go into, you know, military for, you know, let's say a social, that's like a social program. You got, you know, they need money, they need a job. But you come back and, you know, over half the soldiers are, you know, on disability or claiming disability just for income. And again, 22 vets a day commit suicide. You know, nobody has equated that's over 100,000 suicides from just 9/11. And that's also being kept, you know, again, important issues have been kept. I mean, everybody's already gone over the science.
Exactly. That's why I like to focus on the big aspect of it, how everything connects. For example, I have a family member that went to Iraq, served as a couple of tours, came back with lots of issues. I think he's suffering from 13 conditions right now. And, you know, you talk to him and he tells you everything they did over there and what he saw and the vaccines that they injected on them, because they're guinea pigs also. You know, they're there, they test all sorts of things on them. And that's a whole lot of, that's a different subject. We can spend days talking about that, but that's not.
We're talking about this paradigm shift that happened 13 years ago now, and how the consequences even today, you know, have surfaced. And you know, it takes a terrible slap in the face to basically, you know, wake people up that, you know, the consequences will continue. And again, the disparity just between income and rich and poor. And the only one that can really afford to really study this are retirees and people who have set incomes.
Yeah, and I think
because they don't believe austerity can actually get them.
Yeah, I think that the internet has changed that a lot because now, like this guy was saying, in a short amount of time, somebody can come and disprove what somebody's saying, and you know, really change public opinion. So that's why they're moving to regulate the internet, because they really don't like the internet for that matter. Like, for example, here I have, you know, a partial list of 42 examples of false flag. We're just gonna go to talk to something else, but you know, these are all you know, historical facts that I didn't know about. You know, that I didn't learn this in school. No university course taught me that you know, all these different events of world history where governments actually go and kill their own people to start a war or to justify a political or military objective. And you know, this is thanks to the internet. We can research all these things in a split second. But like you said, a lot of people don't have the resources to study all of this, and people don't have time to sit down and read a 600 pages book to connect the dots, because it's a big puzzle. So people on the internet come up with all these facts that you can quickly find a link to a book or verify it, and do your own research to make sure that it's not fake or it's not invented. And that's what we're learning. We're learning world history that has been suppressed from us. And some of it hasn't been necessarily suppressed. It's just that they don't talk about it. It's there, but they don't never mention it. Like the case of the fire on the Reichstag in Germany. It was blamed on a person that was mentally handicapped, and it turns out at the Nuremberg trials that this guy Hermann Göring admitted to setting fire to the German Parliament building in 1933. So this is something that if you think about it and you look at your world leaders, and you look at Bush or Obama or anybody else, and you think that these people will never lie to you, and that you have a democracy, and that you go vote, and you make all the difference, and if you don't vote, you deserve what you get, or the world is going to come to an end. And then you think about all these facts, and you put them in context, and you're like, man, what kind of reality is this? So some people feel, there are two kinds of people, the people that just don't want to listen to it and step back, and I'm like, okay, too much for me, that's not my problem, I'm living my life, I'm happy, who cares? And there are the people who actually feel that, maybe we should do something about it because it's in everybody's interest. And, I think, I like to put a little bit of a grain of sand, but in reality, it's a time-consuming process. So anyways, I'm going to read some quotes from world leaders on terrorism and false flag operations, and then we're going to move to what I really want to talk about, because we're running out of time. But leaders throughout history have acknowledged the dangers of false flags. A quote from Adolf Hitler: "Terrorism is the best political weapon, for nothing drives people harder than the fear of a sudden death." Why, of course, the people don't want war, but after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine the policy, and it's always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it's a democracy or a fascist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them that they're being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism or exposing the country to danger. He's a Nazi leader, same guy. Joseph Stalin: the easiest way to gain control of a population is to carry out acts of terror. The public will clamor for such laws if personal security is threatened. So they've been doing this for a while. And this concept is so well accepted in military doctrine that rules of engagement for naval, air, and land warfare all prohibit false flag operations. I'm going to skip through a few slides here. We talk a little bit about the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where you heard Robert McNamara acknowledging that they didn't know what happened that day, so that was the excuse to kill 59 million Americans and 3 million Vietnamese. Pearl Harbor, that's a lot of questionable incidents happen. There are plenty of books that you can read and documentaries on that subject. Here is a good documentary, September 11, A New Pearl Harbor, that is kind of long, but it's excellent. It covers all the facets of what happened on 9/11. So we're going to move forward. And I mentioned briefly Operation Gladio, run by General Leminster, who was in charge of planning Northwoods. And I want to touch on the subject of the recent false flag in Ukraine, because once you understand the details of what's happening and how they are doing it, you will see that I hope that you guys understand the pattern of what they're trying to accomplish, and that's what I want to focus on. This is a program from Russian television. The program is no longer part of RT, but they erased all the files from the official website on YouTube, but you can still find them. People still post them.
NATO accused of false flag attacks in Ukraine. Coming up.
The third force in eastern Ukraine. Kiev copies George Bush's plans for Iraq. And mainstream hosts storm out of the studio.
Killing your own citizens, then blaming another nation to start wars called a false flag attack. The most infamous is Operation Himmler. Nazis murdered fellow Germans, then blamed Poland to start World War II. Nazis trained by NATO were the vile snipers during the Maidan protests who shot both sides, both the police and their own supporters. It helped spark the violence that brought the coup d'etat. Leaked images show Ukraine nationalists Una Unso being trained to use sniper rifles by NATO. These false flags, writes intelligence author F. William Engdahl, are just the latest atrocity in the documented NATO Operation Gladio. Decades of terror attacks that have killed hundreds throughout Europe have actually been funded and planned by the White House. Top-level officials in the government and the CIA have confirmed. In what Wikispooks calls the most shocking story ignored by the mainstream, Gladio is admitted by former CIA head Bill Colby to be a major operation. Operations like the massacre at Bologna rail station, which killed 85 people and injured hundreds more. EU Parliament passed a resolution condemning the terror, demanded NATO stop and carry out a full investigation. The US simply ignored it. Evidence shows this US campaign of terror continues today, notes the world's leading scholar on Gladio, Dr. Daniel Ganser. FBI whistleblower Sybil Edmonds, who ACLU calls the most gagged person in US history, revealed the CIA's actually expanded the program internationally under codename Gladio B. The same professional snipers as in Kiev, writes Global Research News, have been found shooting both sides in countries throughout the world that offer resistance to the US. Political analyst Eric Draitser joins us. Really great to talk to you. What's going on?
Who's behind the snipers? That they work in the service of Western intelligence. This is quite clear. Likely private contractors, private mercenaries who are paid to create this kind of chaos. Those who probably cut their teeth on the battlefields of Afghanistan and in Iraq, who now are essentially murderers for hire, who are sent anywhere where the United States or its allies deem necessary to create chaos. So you mentioned a couple of examples in Syria, in Ukraine, in Venezuela. We should also remember, of course, Thailand in 2010. We saw a very similar situation there. Egypt most recently as well. This is a standard tactic, create a casus belli for the United States to have a military presence for decades to come.
The world's main instigator of false flags, notes the editor of upcoming book Flashpoint in Ukraine, Dr. Stephen Lenman, is the United States. The US hasn't been threatened with a real attack in hundreds of years, writes the author of Questioning the War on Terror, Dr. Kevin Barrett. The only way to force war on its population is through terror-inducing false flags. 266 American sailors were killed on the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. Using the slogan, "Remember the Maine," the establishment blamed an enemy mine, then colonized Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Admiral Hyman Rickover later revealed it had nothing to do with the enemy. The explosion came from inside the ship. The entire US Joint Chiefs of Staff called for another, quote, "Remember the Maine incident" with Operation Northwoods. Declassified documents show Pentagon plans to blow up a US ship, hijack passenger planes, down an airliner from the US full of college students, wage a, quote, "terror campaign" in Miami, other cities, and Washington, D.C. The false flag attacks must be, quote, "widely publicized in mainstream media to cause a, quote, "helpful wave of national indignation." The plans signed off by Armed Forces Chief Lyman Nemnitzer were blocked at the last minute by a horrified President Kennedy. It was opposition to out-of-control militarism, writes James Douglas in JFK and the Unspeakable, that Douglas says got Kennedy killed by the intelligence services. It is one of the versions for his assassination. Northwood's mastermind Lemnitzer was put in charge of NATO, where he, quote, hoisted the black flag of terror in Europe under Operation Gladio, notes the book Gladio, NATO's Dagger at the Heart of Europe. Kennedy's removal left the path clear for successor Lyndon Baines Johnson to return false flags to centre stage. Within less than a year, LBJ fabricated the attack that plunged the US into the Vietnam disaster. The president made up a non-existent strike on US ships in the Gulf of Tonkin and said, quote, our boys are floating in the water. The lie goaded Congress into authorizing war, killing more than 3 million Vietnamese and 58,000 US servicemen. President Bush Jr. told British Prime Minister Blair that if he couldn't get UN approval to bomb Iraq, he'd paint a US jet in UN colours and try to get it shot down over Iraq to justify invasions. In a bizarre parallel, Life News this week filmed Kiev now using these armoured helicopters with UN insignia against civilians in eastern Ukraine. These are just the false flags that are on the record and officially documented. Some are reprinted in 63 documents the government doesn't want you to read, written by Vietnam vet and former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura. On the few occasions mainstream media let him speak, hosts react with disdain and even storm out the studio in fury at the suggestion their government could ever do anything like that.
Oh, come off it, Jesse.
No, not oh, come off it. Wait a minute. Every war fought starts with a false flag operation.
You can't, in all seriousness, sit there and try and make out anybody...
Okay, let me ask you this, Piers. Wait a minute.
Have you read the 9/11 report and you think it's a piece of fiction?
No, I believe everything in it. I believe... my government's never lied to me, have they? Let's see, where should we start? The Gulf of Tonkin incident? I remember our president sitting on TV telling us our boys are floating in the water, and it turned out to be false.
And because of that, you'll never believe anything.
But they lie all the time. Have you been in government? No, I have.
All right, so that's for... So I've never been in the NFL, but I could watch a football game. Yeah. All right, Jesse, take care.
He's leaving.
For the public to fall for a false flag, mainstream media lies must be coordinated and complete. When the White House lied that Syria's government did the Damascus chemical attack, the entire mainstream media swallowed it whole without asking for a shred of evidence. Last month, US intel admitted actually NATO member Turkey had false flagged the attack, which killed some 1,400 civilians, to justify invasion. Not a single mainstream outlet reported it. Turkey's leaders banned YouTube last month after leaked audio of them planning another false flag to invade Syria, reportedly egged on by John Kerry. Turkey's premier confirmed the authenticity of the tape.
I'll send 4 men from Syria. I'll make up a cause of war by ordering a missile attack on Turkey.
Many times, Kerry has said to me, okay, did you make the decision to strike?
Mainstream as one coordinated a term of art that the Turks were just innocently, quote, discussing military strategy, rather than the appalling truth that Turkey's planning a terrorist false flag on their own land as an excuse to invade Syria, apparently encouraged to commit the supreme international crime by the United States Secretary of State himself. US-backed jihadi admits they're also taught false flags to destroy mosques, then blame Syria's government.
I was originally tasked with the destruction of mosques.
You destroy the mosques so you can put the blame on the army?
Yes. If a mosque is not destroyed, we desecrate it.
The massacre of Odessa this month, reports Counterpunch, has all the signs of a classic US false flag. Shortly after, dozens of CIA spooks were discovered instructing Kiev's junta how to act in East Ukraine. Pro-Kiev thugs were sent to the city of Odessa with these red armbands. But the bloodshed was sparked by this rooftop shooter in a red armband, slaying his own side. Duly provoked, the thugs went on to torch and murder dozens of anti-fascist civilians they thought were to blame for the shooting. James Corbett of The Corbett Report joins us. Really great to see you. Why does the US establishment behave like this?
It's important to understand the establishment as a collection of psychopathic individuals, and that's not meant as some sort of metaphor. That's meant as almost a medical diagnosis. There is a percentage of the population, it's disputed by medical experts, but somewhere between 3 and 4% is generally the figure cited, of people who have a medical condition where they are absolutely unable to feel the natural human empathy that we feel for one another and compassion that we feel for people in situations that are...
I'm going to pause it here, but all of this is important, but I just want to point out that, by the way, this is the guy who put together that earlier video on 100 Years of Lies. He's based in Osaka, Japan. He's a good researcher, and the reason why the politicians are starting to talk about Russian television is because obviously they are doing what a lot of internet-based researchers are doing, which is to expose all these things to see if there is some hope of changing public opinion and ending all these wars. And this guy is talking about a medical condition. These people are, for what we believe, the people in charge, are psychopathic. They have psychopathic behavior. They don't feel empathy for the millions of people that they slaughter, and the public doesn't see all the atrocities. If you want to really see the pictures of dead children and beheadings and all of that, you can watch all of this on the internet, and it changes your life. Because I watched one, and that was it for me. You watch one and you understand really not only it is at stake, but that it is something that could very well happen here, So you make the connection, and you feel compelled to tell other people here, everybody's lying, so let's come together to a middle ground and try to do something about it. And I think that there has been some progress. I don't feel that progress has been fast enough for me. In light of everything that is happening in Ukraine and Syria. So I want to move forward a little bit, and because I don't want to run out of time, and I want to concentrate more on what's happening today. So I'm kind of scared, and I'm not afraid to admit it. Everything that is happening at the geopolitical level. By the way, if you want to you want to research more where the term conspiracy theory comes from, there is a good document on the internet that you can read. It's a declassified CIA document 1035-960. I believe I covered this in the last presentation. And all of this set the stage for what I want to talk about, and that is what's really going on. And the American public really is not interested in geopolitics, and I think that should be at the center stage of everything we talk about. You hear domestic policy, people talking about vaccines, people talking about racial issues, people talking about Hollywood scandals, everything, but always foreign policy is like something that is put in the back burner, and to me it's everything. You can see what they've done in the past, what they're doing right now, and clearly they're telling us through various documents and the things that they do that we are clearly headed for trouble. So a lot of respected ex-military people and a lot of respected knowledgeable people believe that we are currently undergoing World War III. It's just that it hasn't gotten nuclear, and we hope to keep it that way. All the things that they said they were going to do, the invasion of Syria, Libya, Iran. We're going to talk a little bit on the latest developments on Iran and how they are preparing. And apparently the Iranians understand what's going on. They've been preparing for this moment, telling the people we're going to go to war at some point. We don't know when, but it's coming. So a lot of people are getting ready for that. I want to point out also briefly that the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2013 that President Obama signed, within that document, which is big, there is they state that they changed the U.S. nuclear first strike posture against China and Russia, meaning that in the times previous to that, the doctrine called for to absorb a first strike to then respond. Let's say the Russians shoot at first, then we respond. Now, that was to avoid accidents and other things. But now we have changed that to go on a first strike against Russia and China if we feel threatened. So what does that mean? And America is very close to achieve nuclear first strike dominance. That's something that a lot of people don't know about, but when you study the military strategy and the what they call the full spectrum dominance, the deployment of ships and missile assets and anti-missile systems to surround both Russia and China, you realize that they're up to something. It's a clear trend.
Why did the United States attack Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen? Why are U.S. operatives helping to destabilize Syria? And why is the United States government so intent on taking down Iran, in spite of the fact that Iran has not attacked any country since 1798? And what's next? What are we headed for? When you look at the current trajectory that we're on, it doesn't make any sense at all if you evaluate it based on what we're taught in school. And it doesn't make any sense if you base your worldview on the propaganda that the mainstream media tries to pass off as news. But it makes perfect sense once you know the real motives of the powers that be. In order to understand those motives, we first have to take a look at history. In 1945, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world reserve currency, which meant that international commodities were priced in dollars. The agreement, which gave the United States a distinct financial advantage, was made under the condition that those dollars would remain redeemable for gold at a consistent rate of $35 per ounce. The United States promised not to print very much money, but this was on the honor system, because the Federal Reserve refused to allow any audits or supervision of its printing presses. In the years leading up to 1970, expenditures in the Vietnam War made it clear to many countries that the U.S. was printing far more money than it had in gold. And in response, they began to ask for their gold back. This, of course, set off a rapid decline in the value of the dollar. The situation climaxed in 1971 when France attempted to withdraw its gold and Nixon refused. On August 15th, he made the following announcement.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
This was obviously not a temporary suspension, as he claimed, but rather a permanent default. And for the rest of the world who had entrusted the United States with their gold, it was outright theft. In 1973, President Nixon asked King Faisal of Saudi Arabia to accept only U.S. dollars as payment for oil and to invest any excess profits in U.S. Treasury bonds, notes, and bills. In return, Nixon offered military protection for Saudi oil fields. The same offer was extended to each of the world's key oil-producing countries, and by 1975, every member of OPEC had agreed to only sell their oil in U.S. dollars. The act of moving the dollar off of gold and tying it to foreign oil instantly forced every oil-importing country in the world to start maintaining a constant supply of Federal Reserve paper. And in order to get that paper, they would have to send real physical goods to America. This was the birth of the petrodollar. Paper went out, everything America needed came in, and the United States got very, very rich as a result. It was the largest financial con in recorded history. The arms race of the Cold War was a game of poker. Military expenditures were the chips, and the U.S. had an endless supply of chips. With the petrodollar under its belt, it was able to raise the stakes higher and higher, outspending every other country on the planet, until eventually U.S. military expenditures surpassed that of all other nations in the world combined. The Soviet Union never had a chance. The collapse of the communist bloc in 1991 removed the last counterbalance to American military might. The United States was now an undisputed superpower with no rival. Many hoped that this would mark the beginning of a new era of peace and stability. Unfortunately, there were those in high places who had other ideas. Within that same year, the U.S. invaded Iraq in the First Gulf War. And after crushing the Iraqi military and destroying their infrastructure, including water purification plants and hospitals, crippling sanctions were imposed which prevented that infrastructure from being rebuilt. These sanctions, which were initiated by Bush Sr. and sustained throughout the entire Clinton administration, lasted for over a decade and were estimated to have killed over 500,000 children. The Clinton administration was fully aware of these figures.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died.
I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And, you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Miss Albright, what exactly was it that was worth killing 500,000 kids for? In November of 2000, Iraq began selling its oil exclusively in euros. This was a direct attack on the dollar and on U.S. financial dominance, and it wasn't going to be tolerated. In response, the U.S. government, with the assistance of the mainstream media, began to build up a massive propaganda campaign claiming that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and was planning to use them. In 2003, the U.S. invaded, and once they had control of the country, oil sales were immediately switched back to dollars. This is particularly notable due to the fact that switching back to the dollar meant a 15 to 20% loss in revenue due to the euro's higher value. It doesn't make any sense at all unless you take the petrodollar into account.
So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Let's take a look at the events of the past decade and see if you see a pattern. In Libya, Gaddafi was in the process of organizing a bloc of African countries to create a gold-based currency called the dinar, which they intended to use to replace the dollar in that region. US and NATO forces helped destabilize and topple the Libyan government in 2011, and after taking control of the region, US armed rebels executed Gaddafi in cold blood and immediately set up the Libyan Central Bank. Iran has been actively campaigning to pull oil sales off of the dollar for some time now, and it has recently secured agreements to begin trading its oil in exchange for gold. In response, the US government, with mainstream media assistance, has been attempting to build international support for military strikes on the pretext of preventing Iran from building a nuclear weapon. In the meantime, they established sanctions which US officials openly admit are aimed at causing a collapse of the Iranian economy. Syria is Iran's closest ally, and they are bound by mutual defense agreements. The country is currently in the process of being destabilized with covert assistance from NATO, and though Russia and China have warned the United States not to get involved, the White House has made statements within the past month indicating that they are considering military intervention. It should be clear that military intervention in Syria and Iran isn't being considered. It's a foregone conclusion, just as it was in Iraq and Libya. The U.S. is actively working to create the context which gives them the diplomatic cover to do what they already have planned. The motive for these invasions and covert actions becomes clear when we look at them in their full context and connect the dots. Those who control the United States understand that even if a few countries begin to sell their oil in another currency, it will set off a chain reaction and the dollar will collapse. They understand that there is absolutely nothing else holding up the value of the dollar at this point, and so does the rest of the world. But rather than accepting the fact that the dollar is nearing the end of its lifespan, the powers that be have made a calculated gambit. They have decided to use the brute force of the US military to crush each and every resistant state in the Middle East and Africa. That in itself would be bad enough, but what you need to understand is that this is not going to end with Iran. China and Russia have stated publicly and on no uncertain terms that they will not tolerate an attack on Iran or Syria. Iran is one of their key allies, one of the last independent oil producers in the region, and they understand that if Iran falls, then they will have no way to escape the dollar without going to war. And yet the United States is pushing forward in spite of the warnings. What we are witnessing here is a trajectory that leads straight to the unthinkable. It's a trajectory that was mapped out years ago in full awareness of the human consequences. But who was it that put us on this course? What kind of psychopath is willing to intentionally set off a global conflict that will lead to millions of deaths just to protect the value of a paper currency? It obviously isn't the president. The decision to invade Libya, Syria, and Iran was made long before Obama had risen to the national spotlight. And yet, he's carrying out his duty just like the puppets that preceded him. So who is it that pulls the strings? Often the best answer to questions like this are found by asking another question. Qui bono? Who benefits? Obviously, those who have the power to print the dollar out of thin air have the most to lose if the dollar were to fall. And since 1913, that power has been held by the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a private entity owned by a conglomerate of the most powerful banks in the world. And the men who control those banks are the ones who pull the strings. To them, this is just a game. Your life and the lives of those you love are just pawns on their chessboard. And like a spoiled 4-year-old who tips the board onto the floor when they start to lose, the powers that be are willing to start World War III to keep control of the global financial system. Remember that when these wars extend and accelerate. Remember that when your son or your neighbor's son comes back home in a flag-draped coffin. Remember that when they point the finger at the new boogeyman, because the madmen who are running this show will take this as far as you allow them to. So how much time do we have left? It's a question I hear constantly, but it's the wrong question. Asking how much time we have left is a passive posture. It's the attitude of a prisoner who's waiting to be taken out to a ditch and shot in the back of the head. What are our chances? Can we change course? Also the wrong question. The odds don't matter anymore. If you understand what we're facing, then you have a moral responsibility to do everything in your power to alter the course that we're on, regardless of the odds. It's only when you stop basing your involvement on the chances of success that success actually becomes possible. To strip the ill-begotten power from the financial elites and to bring these criminal cartels to justice will require nothing less than a revolution. The government is not going to save us. The government is completely infiltrated and corrupt to the core. Looking to them for a solution at this point is utterly naive. There are 3 stages of revolution, and they are sequential. Stage 1 is already underway. Stage 1 is the ideological resistance. In this stage, we have to actively work to wake up as many people as possible about what is happening and the direction we're headed. All revolutions originate from a shift in the mindset of the population, and no other meaningful resistance is possible without it. Success in this stage of the game can be measured by the contagion of ideas. When an idea reaches critical mass, it begins to spread on its own and seeps into all levels of society. In order to achieve that contagion, we need more people in this fight. We need more people speaking out, making videos, writing articles, getting this information onto the national and international stage. And we especially need to reach the police and the military. Stage 2 is civil disobedience, also known as nonviolent resistance. In this stage, you put your money where your mouth is, or more accurately, you withhold your money and your obedience from the government, and you do everything in your power to bring the gears of the state to a halt. Practiced in mass, this method alone is often enough to bring a regime to its knees. However, if you fail at this stage, Stage 3 is inevitable. Stage 3 is direct physical resistance. Direct physical resistance is the last resort, and it should be avoided and delayed as long as possible. And it should only be invoked after all other options have been thoroughly exhausted. There are those who talk tough and claim that they will resist when the time comes. But what those people fail to realize is that if you are inactive during the first 2 stages and save your efforts for the last resistance, then you will fail. When the Nazis were moving door to door, dragging people out of their homes in Germany, that was the time to fight back physically. But due to the lack of ideological resistance and civil disobedience leading up to that moment, even an armed uprising would have likely failed at that point. An armed uprising can only succeed if the people have established an attitude of active resistance. And active resistance is only possible after their minds have broken free from the mainstream propaganda. If you want to fight back, it's now or never. You're not going to get another chance, and the stakes are far higher.
There is a lot of military assets being moved around. I mean, it's amazing. I can spend a whole presentation, and it is almost every day you see, you know, a bunch of soldiers getting moved from here to there, tanks being shipped by the hundreds to Eastern Europe, nuclear bombers being parked in England, for example, and the Chinese are doing the same also, by the way. So people perceive that something is really going on. And what do our leaders believe? Well, they believe in nuclear survivability. They believe that a nuclear war is winnable. They believe that our enemies won't press the red button, and you know, that we can keep pushing the Russians and pushing everybody, and nothing bad is ever going to happen. So that's what they're relying on. And it's all about money and power. That's how it's been for thousands of years. The United States contains 5% of the world population and currently consumes 25% of the world's energy. And we all know about the so-called petrodollar system, what it entails, and you know, if that fails, you know, our currency could go down the drain. And I'm going to show you this video real quick in a moment, but I want to mention a few things about what's been happening. The reason why we hate Iran is the same reason that we hate Libya a few years ago, is because they're trying to break away from the dollar system. Iran has been planning an oil burst where they bypass the dollar. So are the Russians. And Libya was invaded because Gaddafi was in the final stages of putting together an African currency backed by gold, and where they were going to sell oil for their oil for other currencies aside from the dollar. So you see the pattern. Saddam Hussein wanted to start selling oil in euros before he was invaded. Gaddafi, same fate. Iran is doing the same, and now the Russians are started doing the same, moving away from dollars. So it's a clear trend that it's about money and power. And you go back, and there are quotes from Dick Cheney from 1998 talking about Afghanistan and how they believed that that area was rich in oil, and you know the best way to move that oil from the Caspian area was through Afghanistan. I mean, there's so much evidence that you can spend a lot of time looking at all of this. And same thing with Syria. What's happening in Syria is the President Assad. He's opposed to the construction of gas pipelines through his territory. Some Western-backed pipelines. So that's why the West is demonizing him, so that they can, get rid of him and push the Russians aside, because the Russians are real good. They're real big when it comes to gas in the gas market. The biggest natural gas company, Gazprom, is a Russian company. So all of these, to make a long story short, all of this has to do with same thing, money and power, and energy is at the center of what's going on. So they're willing to push forward in the case of Ukraine, for the same reason. There are lots of pipelines, natural gas pipelines that go from Russia through Ukraine to Europe. And that's a political weapon that people can use. And there are ways to bypass all of that trouble. But it's a chess game of chicken, I would call it. People are willing to sacrifice all these people to have what they want. So here is a good example of where we are headed, and I believe that we are going to go to Iran. That's what General Wesley Clark was told in that interview, and it was planned years ago. And they want to get rid of the regime there, and this is not going to be another Iran. I mean Iraq. It's going to be Iran. Iran is a whole different ball game. But you see, in 2009, there was a paper put together by the Brooklyn Institute where the U.S. and Israel were attempting to establish a diplomatic road to justify a unilateral Israeli attack on Iran. So this is interesting, because if you see what happened a few days ago, where President Obama apparently was, like, not getting along with Netanyahu, and he was, upset about some of the things that have been going on. But when you read the document, what they were planning and how they were planning on going about getting into Iran, it's more than clear, at least to me, that it's all political theater. They really don't hate each other. They have a plan, and what they are going to try to do is say, well, the Israelis attack Iran on their own, and now we have to join the war. And that's why they have to show that they're really, really opposed to each other, or not in agreement, or debating what's going on, whether they're going to have this nuclear deal. Here, let me read, because this is fascinating. This stuff is it can be depressing, but it can also be fascinating. The paper is called "Which Path to Persia? Options for a New American Strategy Towards Iran." Makes clear that negotiations with Iran over its nuclear program is merely theater, and that it will be used to give the world the impression that the United States explore all possible peaceful options before resorting to violent regime change. The report states, any military operation against Iran will likely be very unpopular around the world and require the proper international context, both to ensure logistical support. The operation would require to minimize the blowback from it. The best way to minimize international opprobrium and maximize support is to strike only when there is a widespread conviction that the Iranians were given, but then rejected, a superb offer, so good that only a regime determined to acquire nuclear weapons and acquire them for the wrong reason would turn it down. So remember the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, you see the pattern, now they're blaming it on the same thing. You know, these people are not suicidal, they're not gonna get a nuclear bomb and then shoot it to see themselves annihilated within 30 minutes, you know, but they see what the problem is. They wanna get fully wear armed. So, you know, that's one of the many reasons why personally I do these things and worry about, because I can see that at some point somebody will really screw it up and we're all gonna pay for it. Whether we, you know, believe all these things or not, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whether, you know, you care about foreign policy or not, you know, at some point, if history teaches something, is that it ends in disaster. And that's unfortunately the reality. And, you know, you can see a clear pattern from all of this. They've been telling us in papers and in their speeches that they're not going to stop at, you know, world domination. In my opinion, that's clearly what it is. They control all the energy. They control politically, they control governments. You know, there is no opposition to them. And if you disagree, well, they invade you. But, you know, there are people that have the means to defend themselves. And we talk about the Russians. The Russians, you know, don't have a big army. They don't have a big, their Air Force sucks, their Navy sucks, but they are loaded with nuclear weapons. And that's the only means that they have to defend themselves. And if you push them, at some point, they're gonna do it. I fully believe that they're fully capable of, you know, defending themselves. Let me read this. The most salient advantage this option has to offer, they're going back to the subject of Iran, as over an American air campaign is the possibility that Israel alone would be blamed for the attack. If this proved true, then the United States might not have to deal with the Iranian retaliation or the diplomatic backlash that would accompany an American military operation against Iran. So they've been trying this for years. There is a speech with James Baker, ex-Secretary of State, and Hillary Clinton, where they were joking about what they were planning to do with Iran, and that they're planning to do it in the next 2 or 3 years, and you know, nobody will know when it's going to happen and all of that. So all you see happening today with President Obama not going to the Netanyahu speech, all of that is political theater. You know, it's a lie. It's meant to be deceptive, so that when they are, the public is sold the next war, and you know, if they call mandatory military service for everybody, you know, people will. If you oppose it, then you're not a patriot. You know, you don't like America. You hate it. You like terror. You know, and they've been successful so far, I have to say. They've been successful in, you know, swinging public opinion, but it's starting to change. Again, a lot of the younger generation of people that have the time to research all these things are starting to tell the older folks, you know, we have a problem here, and we need to try to stop it. You know, do whatever we can. And you know, they're not afraid of what they do, because they have underground bunkers. They have food for, you know, 10, 15 years, and you know, the nuclear war, they will survive it. I'll tell you that. They're prepared for that. But the rest of us, you know, if you know, a couple of million Americans die, that's not a big deal to them. And we have, I don't know if you guys remember Dick Cheney recently warning that if we don't do something about this ISIS group of people, that we're going to have a 9/11 that is going to be way worse than the first one. And that comes from the people who actually executed the first 9/11. So they're telling us what they plan to do, and the public, you know, swallow it whole, and you know, they're, oh yeah, we have to go do a ground war. In the Middle East, where, you know, a couple of years ago everybody was opposed, they were able to switch public opinion or swing it to their favor. So those are the kind of things that I, you know, find depressing. But again, you know, it's so much you can do about it. Yeah, we have Putin warning about a whole lot of things, from the petrodollar to nuclear war. You know, the Chinese recently backed Russia on their Ukraine conflict, and they're telling the NATO, you know, you don't belong here. You know, just leave Ukraine alone. But they know what's at stake, and they know that you know, the Americans won't let the petrodollar go out the door, you know, or out the window without a fight. And that's what my conclusion is, and a lot of other people believe the same thing. And they're going to try all different things, from cyber attacks to, you know, all sorts of things before they actually confront each other with nuclear weapons. I believe that we're heading that way. Hopefully I'm wrong. If there is something I want to be wrong about, is this, but very serious matter. But here we have some of the examples of this hardware and assets that are being moved around. I mentioned the tanks moving to Eastern Europe. I talk about the nuclear bombers being sent to a base in, I can't remember, in England somewhere. We have deployment of NATO ships in the Black Sea. We have lots of troops, you know, getting shipped over there, and the Middle East as well. The Russians were blamed for the Malaysia MH17 shutdown incident, and German intelligence cleared them of responsibility on this. And most people don't know that. And I found interesting that two Malaysian airplanes were lost recently, the MH17 and the 370, and I find interesting that the government of Malaysia, which I didn't know, there wasn't sort of a judgment where they came to the conclusion that Tony Blair and George W. Bush were war criminals. So they labeled them, and you know, they labeled them as war criminals. Isn't that interesting that those planes, both from Malaysia Airlines, where one disappeared and the other one was shut down, and there was a third airplane that was asked to detour and fly over another war zone in Syria from Malaysian airline that didn't make it to the national press. 3 airplanes within like 6 months. I mean, to me, it's kind of interesting.
You know another thing about MH17, the Dutch, in November of 2013, when Malaysia indicted, at the same time, the Dutch pulled billions of dollars of financing out of building in the West Bank. So I think it was Berlin that made it's possible that the Israeli gangster behavior got 2 birds with 1 stone by shooting down MH17. They punished the Dutch for pulling the financing, but also punished Malaysia.
Yeah.
It's kind of the behavior of the gangster.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting. I've been following the MH17 and the 370, and I've talked to people that have been in the airline industry and pilots, and they find it interesting that an airplane would just fly for hours, like in the case of 9/11 with the transponder off, and nobody will notice. And with all the radars that we can track, even, you know, a Firefly, you know, thousands of miles away, that this plane is still missing. And by the way, in Operation Northwoods, they had a similar scenario. They were planning a scenario where they will just take an airplane and switch it with another airplane to, you know, fly the other one by remote control. And I mean, it's fascinating the things that these people have done and get away with. Recently, we deployed a whole air wing of A-10 attack jets. These are meant for ground war. They're in Germany with 300 pilots. I mean, they're getting ready for something. I don't know what it is, but they're getting ready for something, as well as B-61 type mini nuclear weapons. They're being stationed. They have more of them now in Europe. So, you know, it's kind of worrying. And here is some of the things that the Russians are doing. They sent NATO this postcard, I think it was from 2 Christmas ago. You know, in the background, there is a picture of a Topol-M, I believe, nuclear intercontinental ballistic missile. And they said, we wish our friends from NATO a happy new year, because they know that this is the only deterrent they have against, you know, an invasion. So they're telling them, and they've been running nuclear drills. You know, they've been like every 2 or 3 months they have one where they shoot a missile without, you know, nuclear weapon to test the system, make sure everything is ready. recently they docked a what they call a carrier killer ship in Cuba, you know, as in a visit, and they've been threatening to deploy nukes and aircrafts to Cuba. I remember, you know, seeing this report on CBS News where they actually showed this kind of airplane. It's a long-range bomber landing in Cuba. They've been building lots of bomb shelters in Moscow, 5,000 just in Moscow alone. So the Russians know that this fight is coming. They're getting ready for it and doing the best they can. But if they're gonna fight with nukes. They're not gonna just take the old hardware that they have and just, you know, hope for the best. And these are the people that fought Hitler. You know, we all remember D-Day, but that's not the big war. The Russians lost 27 million people fighting Hitler, and nobody gives them credit for that. And both sides of the Atlantic funded Hitler. We all know about the Prescott Bush funding and the Rockefellers funding the Nazi war machine and Nazi companies. Banks were prohibited from dealing with the doing business with the enemy back then. This happened recently. This is going back to the subject of ICBM. Russia deploys nuclear ICBMs launchers on combat patrol. All these things they are doing it for the first time in many years. The flying of bombers near the West Coast and the Gulf of Mexico, you know, where you know, like in this case, like in a period of there were 10 days, over 14 bombers came close to the airspace, our airspace in the West Coast. And it is intended to send a message, and the message is, we're ready, don't screw with us, you know. And what kind of people would just play all these chicken games without speaking up? And, you know, I'm talking about the politicians, you know, and the military leaders also, you know, and keep playing this game. Somebody could make a mistake, even if that's not the intention. You know, it's during the Cold War, we were at 40 times, I believe, 40 independent times we were close to you know, nuclear war. We all remember what happened in the 1962 Cuba Missile Crisis. They deploy also in response to the America's Patriot missiles batteries in Poland. They deploy the Iskander missiles. They are on the other side of the Ukraine border, but they're aiming at the you know, the Polish air base where the American systems are located. And the Russians told the Americans, you know, we don't want these systems here. We have a problem with NATO coming to our back door. We feel threatened. Back in 2008, that, you know, Mendeleev was, you know, telling the Americans, we're gonna get rid of that system that you guys are putting there. So they've been clearly warning for many years now, you know, but we keep pushing, and at some point, I think, hopefully not, but I think that they're gonna do something. It's a matter of life or death for them. Touching real quick on the subject of you know, nuclear primacy, the United States, for the first time in 50 years, this an article that was shown in the very important Foreign Affairs piece, a very respected publication. And the article said, today, for the first time in almost 50 years, the United States stands on the verge of obtaining nuclear primacy. It will be probably soon be possible for the United States to destroy the long-range nuclear arsenals of Russia and China with a first strike. So what they're trying to do is put hardware in the vicinity of Russia, so that this is what I think, when they launch the nuclear first strike on Russia and China, the Russia and China won't have time to react, and all their missile silos will be annihilated. Then the so-called ballistic nuclear anti-ballistic missile defense system will come online and shoot any remaining missiles that they launch. And if we if we lose a few cities, to them that's not a problem. But they want to absorb, be able to destroy most of the arsenal so that they stay on top. That's what the missile defense system is all about. That's when I started freaking out, when I came to this conclusion that they've been changing the NDAA for a nuclear first strike. They're positioning their hardware for years. You know, now you see that the Ukraine, Libya, Syrian war that were predicted are happening, and now we're going to Iran. So, and they've been, here is something extremely important down here. They've been getting rid of all the nuclear launch officers. They've been replacing them because some of them have been drinking too much vodka apparently on business trips, and others have been having marital affairs, which, yeah, go ahead.
It should be also pointed out that in the advent, when that first strike happens, the U.S. attacking Russia, it would also, a warning to all of us would be when the government sends out its agents, FBI, DHS, and the rest to pick up who they suspect would be against their moves here in the United States. And so some of us could be on those lists. I know that I probably am for my political activities. I'm not afraid to do that. No. Just keep that in mind when those things happen, when various dissidents and protesters and so forth are rounded up, or you hear word of it, that's probably getting very, very close to that first strike point.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that that's part of the police militarization. That's why it's so important, because they don't wanna lose control here either. You know, they're positioning the missile systems to take care of the Russians and the Chinese, but at the same time they know it's going to be a riot here, and it's going to be World War I because people will feel threatened. At that point, that's what's going to happen. They're going to start rounding up anybody who opposes the government, and we all know we are. Most likely we are in some sort of list, and millions, they wouldn't mind losing 20, 30 million Americans. And they will declare an emergency, and you know, they stop payment of people that rely on government subsidies.
That's part of the internal security state. That's the whole reason for it, to keep the internal pressures on against anything happening.
Exactly. So yeah, I see, I don't know, I think I can connect all these dots, and that's why I'm here. I'm worried about, I care about what happened in 9/11 and all of that, and I do a lot of research, and I like the technical aspects of it and all of that. But I'm more of a big picture person, and I want to, at least do my part so that I don't have any, how you call it, regrets later of not doing anything. And I've been, telling my wife maybe we should just, take a chance and leave the country and go live somewhere else, which a lot of people are doing. It triples the amount of Americans that leave the country every day. And now the trend is with the rich. The rich are starting to live in mass and getting, places to live far from here. But for some people, this is not an option. So you come to the conclusion that at some point, if something bad happens, you're going to be here and you plan for it. But, it's a scary thought. But, I have no doubt in my mind that this is a Nazi-like government, and the real people running it. And that at some point, if something bad happens, a lot of people will be rounded up and taken to FEMA camps or whatever it is, and that's, I don't know, that's why I'm here. At least I said something, So, but talking a little bit about Ukraine, again, we all know about all the positioning of assets in the Middle East. This is from 2 or 3 years ago, when the first Syrian war was about to start, and Obama was threatening with bombing Syria. And the Russians were parking their ships, in the Mediterranean, sending a message, don't do it. And between that and public support against another war, we were able to postpone the bombing of Syria. But we all know about ISIS, and we're sending lots of weapons to this group of people. There were recently 2 airplanes that were shot down carrying weapons for ISIS that were British airplanes. And people are like, the Iraqi government, the Iraqi Prime Minister, and there is another politician that came forward just a few days ago saying the United States is funding ISIS. So why are we funding all these terrorist organizations? Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, Ronald Reagan's freedom fighters in Latin America in the 80s. There is a clear pattern of funding terrorists. And people might argue, well, there are a bunch of incompetents, but really that doesn't explain what we're doing. And we make a bigger mess. Every time we do something, we make a bigger mess. And the Americans, we spent about $5 billion in this recent revolution in Ukraine. There is a video of Victoria Nuland talking to a Chevron, group of people, talking about why they are doing what they're doing in Ukraine. And spend some time here talking about, the terrorists that we fund. For example, we have, a picture of John McCain here talking to a group of people in Ukraine. But right here, right next to his left, is this guy who is from the Sloboda Party over there. He's an open neo-Nazi organization. They even go like this, like the Nazis in their time. And those are the people that we're funding, and they know that that's going on. We have a picture of John McCain with the so-called Syrian moderate rebels, the hard-eating rebels that we're funding over there. And if you think that it's only the Republicans who are that like oil, like George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, check this out from ABC News. Biden's sons get Ukrainian oil company gig. So here is the son of Joe Biden, the vice president, getting a big chair in some Ukrainian oil deal over there and accompanying Ukraine. So all of this has been planned for a while, and everybody's making money, well, not everybody, they are making money from all these things that are happening in Ukraine. And, again, it's more than obvious that, we are in trouble. I'm gonna move to talk a little bit about Africa. I don't know if you guys remember recently we were with this Ebola scare. We deployed 3,000 military personnel to fight the Ebola virus with guns. And in reality, that's how it was sold to us. But in reality, what's happening is that we want to decrease our independence from Middle Eastern oil. So we know that places like Nigeria, Liberia, and all these places in Africa have oil, and the Chinese are in a race with the Americans to build diplomatic ties to try to take seize that opportunity of getting that oil. China is very vulnerable when it comes to energy, so that they're doing their part. Just a quick fact here, a few facts about all the terrorists that we seem to be funding from the beginning of time. We know the Reagan's freedom fighters in Latin America. Carter funded the Mujahideen that included Osama bin Laden. Obama is funding al-Nusra and the moderates in Syria. McCain is, I say McCain, but in reality this is the government. The open neo-Nazis in Ukraine. And I want to point out also that we seem to get distracted with all sorts of different things here in America. And recently, there was a big climate change march here in the U.S. And I believe the climate is changing. I believe that something weird is going on. But maybe I see it from as an outsider perspective, that how can we find time to protest, climate change? It's not that it's not important, it's an extremely important issue. But, with everything else that is happening geopolitically in the world, and all these wars and all these people getting killed and by the thousands and the millions, how come we find time? How come we don't prioritize what we protest? And I would go to a climate change march, anytime. But when I see that people pick and choose what they're going to protest, and when certain political parties in power, they go and protest one thing, but they don't protest the other. Like I remember that the left was all fired up and complaining about George W. Bush's war in Iraq and all of that. And since Obama took office, you really haven't seen any meaningful anti-war protesters out there, which is one of my complaints. I don't blame the people in the public. it's mostly for the organizers. And I want to talk a little bit about, how all these things of false flags and what it has to do with racial issues and all of that. And it's interesting, not only that the public doesn't know how they are being manipulated, but also that using race and demonizing your enemy is a very important political tool that has been used for years. And many domestic issues are used as a distraction from what's happening geopolitically. I remember, that the White House got involved when Trayvon Martin was the controversy came out, and the White House got involved, and the president said that could have been me and other things. But it happens that geopolitically, there was a lot of things important happening in Syria and in the Middle East, and I think the White House used this as a distraction and make it a racial issue. What I find interesting is that so much national outrage about what happened with Trayvon Martin, but here you have this guy, a 16-year-old from Colorado, American citizen, who was killed by a drone strike. And nobody knows about him. Nobody, make any big protests or anything like that. And his daddy was, quote unquote, a suspected militant. The Justice Department or the government never provided any evidence. But they didn't even say if the kid was a suspected militant. They just, targeted him with a drone strike. So there is clearly a problem here. It's like, we can't just stand up for African Americans. We need to stand up for everybody, and that's the way I see it. And I think that all these national scandals and protests and things like that are often very, very reasonable and very important, and we need to talk about a whole lot of issues, including racial issues. But we stand on the verge of making a big mistake, and we need to look past these issues.
I think a lot of the distraction silos that are out there, these political silos, such as ones you mentioned, and 100 more, are by design, or many by design, to keep the left, keep the people distracted, and not able to come together on a single silo issue such as this.
Completely agree with you. Completely agree with you. So we have here our president that a lot of people, feel hesitant to criticize, because if you criticize Obama, you are, by definition, according to them, a right-winger and a racist. And I just got tired of that. At some point I said, forget it. But here is something interesting. He remember when he was crying when the Sandy Hook shooting happened, and he was wiping his eyes, and I never saw a single tear in high definition videos. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt. There was a school that was bombed in Yemen, and who. Did anybody cry? And these are kids, just like our kids, And our president has been also quoted saying, "I'm really good at killing people," which is kind of upsetting to me, because you don't make that kind of jokes. And there are plenty more jokes that he's done like that. And if you're a figure of that caliber, you shouldn't be joking like George W. Bush. The weapons of mass destruction, we haven't found them yet, after 3 million people, 1.5 million in that case, died. So anyways, that's a game. To them, that's just a game.
When did Obama say, "I'm really good at killing people"?
Apparently he was quoted. There is a book that was written, can't remember the name, but I can find it for you, where... About a year ago, yeah. And there was there is a video of him on a national dinner, press dinner, can't remember what it was, where he was telling a jokes about his daughters and this group of young, can't remember the name of the group, but it's a musical group, these young fellows. And he was telling them, like, it was something like along the lines, you can probably search it on the internet and see the original video. He was saying something along the lines like, "Oh, don't mess with my daughters, because remember, drone strike, you won't see it coming, And the reason why we do all these drone strikes and we justify them is because it is politically, and in my opinion, racist. Is we care more about American lives, so we flatten a whole neighborhood instead of getting soldiers there at risk and search for a suspected militant to bring it to justice. So we rather just throw a Hellfire missile, and if it's stray off course and kill, birthday party, wedding parties, it's not a big deal because, it's not African Americans. That would be racist.
That quote, he was kind of speaking facetiously. Someone called him a murderer after one of those drone strikes. I don't think it was that kid. I think it was somebody else. And somebody called him a murderer, and he said, well, that's another title that I have now.
Was that the news correspondence dinner, 2014, I think, 2013, 2014,
Yeah, no, there is I voted for this guy, by the way. That's my background. I voted for him in 2008 only once. That was it for me. But, it's like I don't believe him. I don't believe a single thing he say anymore. But here is a quick video of an activist and the issue of racism and how the military use it and all of that. And it's interesting because this is how they manipulate public opinion for.
And I tried hard to be proud of my service, but all I could feel was shame. And racism could no longer mask the reality of the occupation. These were people. These were human beings. I've since been plagued by guilt anytime I see an elderly man, like the one who couldn't walk, who we rolled onto a stretcher and told the Iraqi police to take him away. I feel guilt anytime I see a mother with her children, like the one who cried hysterically and screamed that we are worse than Saddam as we forced her from her home. I feel guilt anytime I see a young girl, like the one I grabbed by the arm and dragged into the street. We were told we were fighting terrorists. The real terrorist was me, and the real terrorism is this occupation. Racism within the military has long been an important tool to justify the destruction and occupation of another country. It has long been used to justify the killing, subjugation, and torture of another people. Racism is a vital weapon employed by this government. It is a more important weapon than a rifle, a tank, a bomber, or a battleship. It is more destructive than an artillery shell, or a bunker buster, or a Tomahawk missile. While all those weapons are created and owned by this government, they are harmless without people willing to use them. Those who send us to war do not have to pull a trigger or lob a mortar round. They do not have to fight the war, they merely have to sell the war. They need a public who is willing to send their soldiers into harm's way. They need soldiers who are willing to kill and be killed without question. They can spend millions on a single bomb, but that bomb only becomes a weapon when the ranks of the military are willing to follow orders to use it. They can send every last soldier anywhere on earth, but there will only be a war if soldiers are willing to fight. And the ruling class, the billionaires who profit from human suffering, care only about expanding their wealth, controlling the world economy. Understand that their power lies only in their ability to convince us that war, oppression, and exploitation is in our interest. They understand that their wealth is dependent on their ability to convince the working class to die to control the market of another country. And convincing us to kill and die is based on their ability to make us think that we are somehow superior. Soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen have nothing to gain from this occupation. The vast majority of people living in the U.S. have nothing to gain from this occupation. In fact, not only do we have nothing to gain, but we suffer more because of it. We lose limbs, endure trauma, and give our lives. Our families have to watch flag-draped coffins lowered into the earth. Millions in this country without health care, jobs, or access to education must watch this government squander over $450 million a day on this occupation. Poor and working people in this country are sent to kill poor and working people in another country to make the rich richer. And without racism, soldiers would realize that they have more in common with the Iraqi people than they do with the billionaires who send us to war. I threw families onto the street in Iraq, only to come home and find families thrown onto the street in this country, in this tragic and unnecessary foreclosure crisis. We need to wake up and realize that our real enemies are not in some
Pause it here because just in the interest of saving time. but you know, you get the idea. It's a very powerful tool, and they use it. Both sides use it, you know. And I want to mention this that just came to my head. I don't know if you heard this, but the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, the guy who was in charge of that committee when Obama was given the Nobel Peace Prize, he was recently, and this is unprecedented, they demoted the guy recently, about a week ago. You know, apparently to give the committee some credibility. Erling, thanks for coming. It was nice seeing you.
Thank you very much, Waldemar.
Thank you very much. It was very nice to see you. Take care. So yeah, it's you know, it's a very powerful tool, and we spend all this time fighting each other and talking about Republicans are the problem, and I try to explain people, you know, that it doesn't really matter, you know. The left is the right, it's the same hand. But it takes, I have to acknowledge, it takes some time to see past all of this. The only way you can do this is just by, you know, diving into all this information and studying it and reading books and documentaries where you can break free from what you were told, the things that you've been told. You know, that's pretty much what I have. I mentioned about the firing of the nuclear officers recently, and they've been replaced about 200 or 225 or something that they have been fired. These are people that were in charge of pushing the red buttons and you know, for minor things. So they're clearly sweeping the entire nuclear command. And you know, if I were the Chinese or the Russians, I would be looking at this information and saying, you know, you know, something is going on, you know. And there were recently a transfer of nuclear weapons from a base in Texas to a place in North Carolina, and there was a politician, I believe it was Lindsey Graham, who was apparently in a coincidence was threatening that if we didn't bomb Syria back then, about 2 years ago or a year ago, about 2 years ago, that a nuke will blow up in a particular bay in North Carolina. What a coincidence, you know, and that it happened that within days of that apparently scandalous transfer of unauthorized transfer of nuclear weapons from that base in Texas to a place in North Carolina.
Some have theorized that the first missing Malaysian airline aircraft, and by the way, purportedly stationed currently has been recently at Diego Garcia, that's where it ended up. There's some evidence for that. That eventually will find it to be carrying a nuke aboard that aircraft, and eventually somehow a next false flag in the United States with that aircraft carrying a nuke over an American city. Some have theorized that, given these elements come together.
Yeah, there've been a lot of discussions also on the alternative news websites, because there are also a lot of Libyan airliners, apparently with the war, that are missing. So you know, they could bring nukes inside of them and pull EMPs and, you know, destroy American cities, and then, you know, blaming on who knows what, you know, maybe the Russians, and then they would say, well, we had to strike the Russians because they, you know, they're connected to this, you know, or it was a case of missing Russian nukes, and you know, now we have to get rid of their weapons of mass destruction. So they're certainly planning something else. You know, I don't know. Nobody knows when it's going to happen, but certainly there is a pattern here, and the pattern is very troubling. Again, I hope that you know, that we can reach enough people to you know, at least convince them that we need some real political change in this country, and not just, you know, stay with the same. And I voted for third parties. You know, I made the mistake of voting, I have to say, in the local elections, because you know, I was inspired by all the, you know, what was going on with the GMOs, but I surely realized that it, you know, even local politics can be corrupted. And, you know, I voted for third parties, and I, you know, wouldn't vote for anybody that is a Democrat or Republican. That's just not my policy.
Well, it's clear that we are a two-party dictatorship today. Proof of that was in 2012 when Green Party candidate Jill Stein was handcuffed to a railing as she had tried to enter the debates during that time frame. That should tell you all you want to know about politics in this country.
Yeah, this book, The Tragedy and Hope, is very, very interesting because this historian that apparently was spent some time with this group of people that are the real people in charge. He said that that the left and the right is just a lie. That it's just the same people, and it's just to give people the impression that there is some choice, but in reality they control both sides, so it doesn't really matter. And what you see is that the Democrats, are carrying out the same exact foreign policy as the last administration, the George W. Bush administration. So nothing has changed in that aspect. So we are clearly, moving forward with the same objectives, if you will. So with that, I conclude my presentation, and thank you. An applause back to you guys that made it all the way to the end.